Ethan had long believed that art held the power to transform adversity into inspiration. For him, each brushstroke and every word carried the weight of redemption, a notion that fueled his pursuit of a story worth telling. His research for an upcoming book on the relationship between creative expression and healing led him to a name shrouded in mystery: Serena. Once revered in the art world, her reputation was marred by a betrayal that forced her into solitude, leaving behind a legacy of masterpieces and a life in retreat. On an overcast morning, with the chill of early autumn in the air, Ethan found himself navigating winding streets and forgotten alleys. His footsteps carried him away from bustling thoroughfares to a part of town where history lingered in cracked sidewalks and abandoned warehouses. Amid this tapestry of faded grandeur, a modest building beckoned, a derelict structure that had once served as a creative hub for local artists. Its worn facade hinted at former glory, and within its walls, whispers of Serena's past awaited rediscovery. Ethan stepped inside the neglected studio with measured determination. The atmosphere felt heavy with memories. Dust danced in stray beams of light that filtered through grimy windows, and the scattered remnants of paint tubes and brushes hinted at a once thriving creative spirit. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of floorboards. It was in this quiet, solitary space that he expected to meet the woman whose art had once captivated so many, even if now only echoes remained. He observed a large canvas leaning against a dilapidated easel. Its surface, though neglected, still held traces of vibrant life, a reminder of the passion that had once flowed so freely from Serena's hand. A notebook lay open on a weathered table, its pages filled with sketches and jotted thoughts. Each detail, no matter how subtle, spoke of a person who had lived deeply and created fiercely. Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. He was determined to bridge the gap between a storied past and an uncertain present. A soft sound from a far corner of the studio disrupted his reflections. He turned slowly to see a figure emerging from the shadows. Serena stood there, her presence as enigmatic as the paintings surrounding her. The woman who had once graced galleries with her evocative works now carried an air of austerity. Her eyes, dark and measured, scanned the room with a guarded wariness, as though every brushstroke and every shard of broken glass was a reminder of past wounds. Ethan offered a respectful nod, his voice measured as he greeted her. "I'm Ethan," he said, his tone calm and sincere. "I have been drawn here by the legend of your art." His words were carefully chosen, intended to acknowledge her reputation without delving into the pain that had driven her into isolation. Serena's response was curt, a single word that carried an edge of detachment. "I suppose you could say that." Her expression remained unreadable, her gaze shifting away from him as if the mere act of connection threatened to expose the vulnerabilities she guarded so jealously. The room seemed to grow colder as she spoke, her words floating in the stillness like fragments of a shattered dream. Unperturbed by her reserve, Ethan continued to explore the studio, taking in every detail without intrusion. His eyes fell upon a collection of canvases stacked against a far wall, each marked by bold, confident strokes and the faint residue of long-forgotten emotions. There was a poetry in the disarray, a beauty hidden beneath layers of neglect. Even as he absorbed the setting, he remained acutely aware of Serena's presence, a silent witness to his quiet admiration. Minutes stretched into an eternity as the two shared the same space without fully acknowledging one another. There was an unspoken understanding, a recognition of mutual solitude. While Ethan's curiosity was evident in every deliberate movement, Serena's guarded posture and terse replies spoke of a hardened spirit, unwilling to revisit painful memories. Yet, beneath that armor, Ethan sensed a faint, flickering ember, a potential for rekindled hope buried deep within her. As the day progressed, Ethan found himself drawn into a tentative dialogue. Not through grand proclamations or extravagant gestures, but through the measured cadence of a conversation that navigated around past traumas and focused instead on the beauty that still lingered in scattered brushstrokes and fragmented sketches. He asked questions that invited reflection without prying, his words imbued with a genuine admiration for the art and a desire to understand the journey that had brought Serena to this point of quiet isolation. Serena's answers were brief and deliberate, each one a carefully guarded glimpse into a past that she preferred to keep hidden. "Art was once my solace," she admitted softly, her voice steady but distant. "Now it is a relic of what once was." Her confession was not one of bitterness but of resignation, a recognition that the very thing that had once elevated her spirit now served as a reminder of betrayal. In the measured tone of her speech, Ethan detected the faint echo of a time when passion and creativity had intermingled freely, unburdened by the weight of mistrust. During a quiet moment, as the late afternoon light began to fade, Ethan observed Serena standing before a nearly blank canvas. The surface appeared untouched, yet it pulsed with latent energy. "There is more to be said than what is on that canvas," he remarked gently, his words neither intrusive nor presumptuous. "Every piece, even those that seem void of emotion, holds a story waiting to be told." His statement was not a critique, but an invitation, a subtle entreaty to consider that every silence could be transformed into expression. For several long moments, silence reigned. The only sound was the distant hum of the city outside, a reminder that life continued unabated beyond the walls of this secluded studio. In that stillness, Serena's eyes briefly met Ethan's, and there was a glimmer of recognition, a fleeting moment where vulnerability intersected with cautious optimism. It was not a confession of feelings, but a silent acknowledgement that perhaps, in this encounter, there lay an opportunity for healing. "You speak." The conversation gradually circled around the very essence of what it meant to be an artist scarred by loss. Ethan shared anecdotes of creative souls who had turned personal pain into powerful works of art, emphasizing that redemption was a journey laden with setbacks yet enriched by moments of clarity. His narrative was not merely academic, it was the product of years spent chronicling lives touched by the transformative power of expression. With each carefully articulated observation, he painted a picture of hope, one that was as subtle as it was profound. Serena listened with an intensity that belied her initial detachment. Her gaze, often distant, now softened ever so slightly, as if she were considering the possibility that redemption might still be attainable. The dialogue, sparse in its exchange of words, became a delicate dance of insights and silences, each step measured with care. Ethan's steadfast presence, unburdened by judgment, appeared to carve a small niche of trust within the walls of her solitude. By the time dusk settled, the studio had transformed from a mere repository of abandoned memories into a space where tentative bridges began to form between two disparate worlds. Ethan gathered his notes, careful not to disturb the fragile equilibrium that had emerged during their encounter. As he prepared to leave, he offered one final remark, quiet yet laden with promise. "Every masterpiece begins with a single, uncertain stroke. I hope one day you'll see that even the most hidden stories deserve a chance to be retold." Serena's reply was measured, a simple nod, the only gesture that conveyed an emotion too complex for words. As he stepped out of the studio, the weight of the day settled in his mind. He knew that he had only just begun to scratch the surface of the intricate tapestry that was Serena's life. The journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty, yet every moment of their brief encounter had reaffirmed his belief in the possibility of transformation. Outside, the cool evening air embraced him, and the city's muted symphony of sounds carried him toward an uncertain future. In that transient twilight, Ethan resolved to return. He sensed that beyond the icy exterior lay a reservoir of experiences, emotions, and untold stories waiting for the right moment to resurface. He would patiently explore the contours of her silence, ready to listen when the time came for the full narrative to emerge. This first encounter was not the culmination of his quest, but merely the opening chapter of a story that promised renewal and the slow reawakening of a dormant spirit. It was a day marked not by grand gestures, but by the subtle interplay of hope and desolation, a quiet testament to the enduring belief that even the most solitary souls could find solace in the embrace of understanding. The following morning, as dawn spread a pale glow over the city, Ethan found himself compelled to return to the studio. The memory of yesterday's encounter lingered like the quiet hum of an unfinished melody, a reminder of both the beauty and the sorrow hidden behind closed doors. With a mixture of anticipation and resolve, he navigated the narrow streets once again, each step fueled by a determination to understand more than just the surface of a guarded soul. Upon arriving, he discovered the studio transformed by the light of a new day. The abandoned canvases and scattered remnants of paint had taken on a softer aspect in the gentle illumination of morning. The silence, once oppressive, now seemed to cradle a promise of renewal. Standing at the threshold, Ethan hesitated only for a moment before stepping inside, mindful of the fragile trust he had begun to build. Serena was there too, a solitary figure absorbed in the quiet work of dusting off a long-forgotten painting. The work before her was more than an arrangement of colors and shapes. It was an echo of a time when art was a conduit for emotion rather than a relic of heartbreak. Her movements were deliberate, each motion a silent act of remembrance. The subtle way she ran her hand along the contours of the canvas suggested that beneath the cool reserve lay an artist still capable of feeling deeply. Ethan greeted her with a gentle nod, his voice soft yet sincere. "Good morning, Serena. It's a new day, and sometimes new days bring unexpected clarity." His words, chosen with care, hinted at a shared understanding that every moment could be a step toward healing. Without immediate response, Serena continued her careful work, as if the very act of tending to the painting was a silent conversation with her past. It was not long before she paused, setting down a brush with the measured deliberateness of someone who valued each moment. Her eyes met his, and in that fleeting glance, there was a spark of acknowledgement, a subtle recognition of mutual loneliness and hope. In the quiet that followed, Ethan settled into a chair placed near a large, dusty window. His presence was quiet and unobtrusive, a living testament to his willingness to simply be there without demanding immediate transformation. The studio, filled with the muted sounds of a waking city, bore witness to this gentle exchange of presence and intent. Their early interactions were punctuated by a series of unspoken understandings. Serena began to share fragments of her morning routine, a simple ritual of preparing tea, the careful selection of a favorite mug, and the deliberate way she arranged her tools. Each act was laden with an undercurrent of tradition and loss, as though the habitual motions provided a temporary escape from memories too painful to revisit. Ethan listened with unwavering attention, each detail adding layers to the portrait he was gradually painting of the woman before him. As the hours slipped by, conversation naturally emerged from the space between shared silence and quiet activity. Serena spoke, not in grand declarations, but in measured, thoughtful reflections. "This painting," she said, gently touching the edge of a nearly completed canvas, "once carried the laughter of my youth. I remember a time when every stroke felt as though it echoed the warmth of the sun." Her voice was low and even, yet beneath its calm surface, Ethan could sense the reverberations of a long-forgotten passion. Ethan's own recollections were woven into his responses. "I have known moments when creativity was like a wellspring, a source of solace and strength. There is a certain courage in allowing oneself to feel so completely." His words carried the weight of his own experiences, speaking to the transformative power of vulnerability. In this quiet communion, each word, though measured, resonated with authenticity and respect. Gradually, Serena began to allow her defenses to relax. She no longer measured her words with the same tightness as before, instead permitting herself small moments of reflection that bridged the chasm between isolation and connection. "I once believed that to feel was to invite suffering," she confessed softly, her gaze fixed on the delicate interplay of light and shadow across the studio floor. "Perhaps I was mistaken. But the path back to such warmth feels treacherous, as if every step might shatter what remains of me." Ethan's reply was thoughtful, his tone imbued with empathy rather than pity. "Every step forward is a testament to resilience. The scars we bear are not symbols of defeat, but of survival, and every mark on our canvas tells a story worth sharing." His statement was not meant to erase the pain, but to validate the strength required to persist in the face of past betrayals. Throughout the day, the two worked in tandem with the silent understanding that trust was being nurtured in increments. Serena slowly revealed more of her personal recollections. Each shared memory was like a small seed planted in the fertile soil of their growing connection. She recalled the day she first held a brush as if it were a magic wand, the promise of artistic expression mingling with the hope of discovering herself. Yet, with each memory came the weight of loss, a betrayal by someone she once trusted implicitly, a fracture in the relationship between art and her spirit. Ethan absorbed these confessions with a careful reverence, allowing the truth of her words to resonate without interrupting the narrative of her experience. His questions were few but precise, each one designed to gently coax more light from the shadows without forcing revelations too quickly. "Do you ever wonder if the beauty of your art might someday bridge the gap between your past and the possibility of tomorrow?" he asked at one point, his voice quiet and reflective. Serena paused, considering his inquiry. The question seemed to unlock a door that had long remained bolted. With a measured sigh, she replied, "I wonder if I can ever trust myself to believe in that possibility. Art was once my solace, my refuge, but now it feels like a relic, a reminder of what I lost rather than what I might regain." Her words were not delivered with dramatic flair. Rather, they carried the subtlety of a heart that had learned to feel in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. The conversation meandered through landscapes of memory and quiet hope, each shared insight building a bridge over a chasm of past pain. Ethan recounted stories of other artists who had walked similar paths, stories that were both cautionary and filled with the promise of redemption. His narratives, steeped in personal experience and the lore of creative resilience, lent a sense of universality to their private dialogue. In turn, Serena's guarded recollections began to soften, the rigid lines of her silence gently dissolving in the warmth of honest conversation. As the day yielded to the soft glow of the late afternoon, the atmosphere in the studio had shifted noticeably. What began as a space filled with the detritus of lost dreams had transformed into a sanctum of tentative hope, a place where the scars of betrayal met the possibility of healing. Every shared word, every pause laden with unspoken emotion added depth to their evolving connection. There was a profound beauty in the slow, deliberate unfolding of trust, a beauty that was as fragile as it was resilient. By the time evening's cool air filtered through the broken windows, the two had reached an unspoken understanding that the path to rediscovery was neither swift nor straightforward. Serena, though still cautious, appeared more open to the idea that vulnerability was not synonymous with weakness. Ethan, steadfast in his gentle persistence, before parting ways that day as the studio's door creaked closed behind him, Ethan offered a quiet promise. Today was a small step toward reclaiming a part of yourself, and I believe every step will reveal more of the beauty that lies within your past and your future. His voice was firm yet tender, a vow made in the language of shared hope and understanding. In that silent moment of departure, as the last light faded and the shadows lengthened, both realized that something had shifted irreversibly. The seeds of trust had been planted in the fertile ground of shared experience, and though the journey ahead was uncertain, it now held the promise of transformation. It was a day marked not by grand declarations, but by the simple, profound act of being present, a gesture that spoke volumes about the capacity of the human spirit to heal, to trust, and ultimately to love. A soft drizzle had begun to fall by the time Ethan returned to the studio. The muted patter against the window panes lent an almost musical quality to the otherwise quiet space. He entered with measured steps, aware that each visit carried the potential to deepen a connection already etched in the shared silence of their lives. Inside, Serena was meticulously sorting through a pile of age sketches and old mixed media experiments. The room, now bathed in the subdued light of a rainy afternoon, bore witness to her quiet ritual, a process of sifting through memories, selecting those that still resonated despite the passage of time. The air carried a scent of old paper and turpentine, an aroma that evoked both nostalgia and a subtle undercurrent of longing. Ethan observed her as she delicately traced a faded line on one of the sketches, her fingers moving with deliberate precision. In that moment, the studio transformed into a private sanctum where vulnerability was revealed not through words, but through the very act of creation. The past, with all its unspoken narratives, was unfolding in layers, each line on paper a marker of both joy and sorrow. Do you ever feel that these fragments hold secrets yet untold? Ethan inquired softly, his voice blending curiosity with a respectful deference to her process. His question was not a challenge, but rather an invitation to explore the hidden depths that these remnants might reveal. Serena paused, her gaze drifting to a sketch that depicted a figure with eyes that seemed to harbor both wisdom and melancholy. "They are more than memories," she responded in a low, thoughtful tone. "They are echoes of moments that have shaped me, both the triumphs and the betrayals." There was a deliberate cadence in her words, as if she were carefully weighing each syllable before allowing it to escape. In that brief exchange, Ethan sensed an openness, a tentative willingness to allow the past a voice without exposing every raw detail. Encouraged by her measured candor, Ethan moved to a nearby table cluttered with old notebooks. He selected one that appeared particularly worn, its cover marked by time and a certain delicate resilience. "This one," he said, "has a certain weight to it, as though the pages contain more than just sketches and notes." His fingers brushed over the embossed lettering, tracing an intricate design that hinted at a time when passion and creativity flowed unrestrained. Serena joined him, her presence quiet but unmistakably engaged. "That book belonged to my early days," she revealed, her tone both reflective and guarded. "It holds drafts of ideas, scattered thoughts on art and life, and even some of my earliest attempts to capture beauty before the world turned cold." Her admission was soft, yet it resonated with an authenticity that transcended the barriers of time. It was as if By sharing these fragments of her former self, she was gradually letting her guard down. Together they began to leaf through the fragile pages. Each entry was a window into a past where the pain of betrayal had not yet cast its long shadow. Ethan was struck by the vibrancy of her earlier self, a spirit unburdened by disillusionment, capable of seeing the world in brilliant, unfiltered hues. The narratives were raw and earnest, laden with a youthful fervor that belied the quiet resilience of later years. As the rain intensified outside, a steady rhythm became the backdrop to their unhurried exploration of the past. Serena pointed to a passage where she had once described the transformative experience of witnessing a sunset, comparing it to the sudden burst of inspiration that could alter the course of a day. In that moment, I believed every ending could lead to a new beginning, she recalled, the memory shimmering in her voice. But life, in its relentless way, taught me that beginnings are often veiled in loss. Ethan absorbed every word, his mind piecing together the fragments of her history with gentle precision. There is a raw beauty in that realization, he commented. It is in the interplay of loss and hope that we often find our truest selves. His response was thoughtful, each phrase carefully sculpted to honor her experiences, without oversimplifying the profound complexity they represented. The conversation evolved into a quiet dialogue about the nature of artistic expression, a theme that seemed to weave its way through the fabric of both their lives. They discussed the ephemeral quality of inspiration, how fleeting moments of brilliance could be lost amidst the noise of everyday existence, and yet how, when nurtured, these sparks could ignite a slow-burning revolution within the soul. Serena recalled an instance when a burst of color on an otherwise monochrome canvas had suddenly transformed her perspective. There was a day when everything felt muted, as though the world had lost its vibrancy, she recounted. Yet, in a single moment, a stroke of cerulean broke through the dullness, reminding me that even the bleakest days could hide the promise of renewal. Her words were imbued with an inner truth, a recognition that every experience, no matter how painful, contained the seed of possibility. Ethan's eyes shone with a quiet admiration. It is in those unexpected fractures of light that we often find the strength to rebuild. Each memory, whether wrapped in joy or sorrow, serves as a reminder of the resilience we harbor. His voice carried not just understanding, but also a shared determination to honor the complexity of human emotion. Their exchange, marked by the interplay of recollection and introspection, continued well into the afternoon. The studio, with its scattered relics of a once flourishing creative life, now pulsed with a renewed sense of connection. Both individuals seemed to habit a space where the weight of history and the hope of renewal coexisted, each moment laden with the possibility of transformation. At one point, Serena carefully unrolled a canvas that had been tucked away behind a makeshift screen. It was a piece from her earlier career, a portrait rendered in muted tones that captured the delicate interplay of shadow and light. I once believed that art was a mirror reflecting the soul, she said, quietly studying the familiar contours of her own expression. But now, I see it more as a window, one that offers a glimpse into the endless interplay of memory and possibility. Her voice was steady, yet there was an unmistakable tremor beneath the surface, a subtle admission of the risk inherent in exposing one's inner world. Ethan's response was measured, his tone imbued with a deep-seated respect. A window indeed reveals not only what lies within, but also what can be discovered beyond. It is a reminder that every soul, no matter how scarred, holds within it the potential for rebirth. His words carried the weight of a promise, an assurance that the journey of rediscovery was as much about embracing the past as it was about daring to envision a future unburdened by pain. The conversation shifted naturally into quieter territories, where the past was allowed to speak in soft, unguarded murmurs. As they continued to explore the remnants of Serena's creative journey, a new understanding began to emerge. The layers of pain that had once seemed insurmountable were slowly being reconfigured, transformed by the simple act of being witnessed, of being shared with someone who listened with an open heart. Time, as it often does in such moments, slipped away unnoticed. The interplay of light and shadow, of memories both cherished and painful, formed a delicate tapestry that bound them together in a silent, unspoken pact. There was an inherent strength in that shared vulnerability, a testament to the transformative power of empathy and the willingness to confront one's past without fear of judgment. As the rain began to subside and the muted hum of the city crept back into the room, Ethan and Serena found themselves in a moment of reflective silence. The studio, once a repository of isolated fragments, had become a space where the interplay of memory and hope was celebrated, a space where the act of recalling the past was not a rehashing of old wounds, but rather a step toward healing. The dialogue they had nurtured was both an exploration and an affirmation, that even in the wake of betrayal, there remained a spark of resilience that could ignite a slow, deliberate transformation. Before the day drew to a close, Ethan gently suggested, perhaps the most profound art is not what is created in isolation, but what emerges when we allow ourselves to be seen, when we dare to share the layers of our experience with another. His words resonated deeply, reflecting an understanding that the journey toward redemption was not a solitary path, but one illuminated by the shared light of mutual understanding. Serena regarded him for a long moment, her eyes glistening with unspoken gratitude. In your presence, I find that even the most concealed parts of my history are given room to breathe, she admitted quietly. It is as though the act of sharing transforms them from burdens to be carried into fragments of hope. There was a sincerity in her voice that spoke of long-held truths finally coming to light, a truth that had been hidden beneath layers of pain and mistrust. As the shadows lengthened and the first hints of evening crept back through the studio, the two understood that they had ventured further along the path of rediscovery. They had not merely revisited fragments of the past, they had reinterpreted them in a way that allowed for the emergence of something entirely new, a mutual narrative woven from the threads of shared experience, quiet introspection, and the gradual unburdening of old wounds. With the close of day, as Serena carefully returned the canvases and sketches to their rightful places, Ethan made his way to the door with a quiet resolve. Today has shown me that every story is layered, and that it is only when we allow these layers to unravel that we can truly begin to heal, he said softly, his words imbued with a promise of continued exploration. His departure was marked by a sense of measured anticipation, an understanding that the journey they had embarked upon was far from complete. In the quiet aftermath of their exchange, the studio held within it the promise of future chapters. A promise that as the layers continued to unravel, both pain and hope would be transformed into a narrative of redemption and quiet rebirth. It was a day marked not by dramatic revelations, but by the subtle interplay of shared truths and the silent acknowledgement that sometimes the most profound healing arises from simply being present with one another. Morning broke with a tentative light that crept slowly across the city, softening the hard edges of night. In the muted glow of early hours, Serena awoke in the small, sparsely furnished room she had come to regard as both refuge and confine. The previous days had etched themselves into her memory, each encounter with Ethan a gentle reminder that even the most fractured spirit could harbor the possibility of renewal. Today, as the soft cadence of a distant city stirred her from sleep, she sensed that the long, dormant pulse of creativity was beginning to stir. After a silent breakfast taken with quiet contemplation, Serena made her way once again to the studio. The passage to that sanctuary felt less daunting now, as if the weight of past regrets was slowly being lifted by the promise of new beginnings. The city outside moved with an indifferent rhythm, yet within the walls of her creative space, every detail seemed charged with meaning. Dust motes danced in the pale light through stained glass windows, and every brush, every canvas held the whispers of a time when colors had been a conduit for her unrestrained emotions. Upon entering, she found the studio unexpectedly different from before. Ethan had returned during the early hours, having arranged a modest surprise, an assortment of fresh wildflowers placed on a weathered wooden table. The simple gesture spoke of a tender attentiveness that needed no flourish, a quiet affirmation that sometimes beauty arises in the unspoken. The blooms, with their soft petals and subtle fragrance, symbolized a delicate optimism that had begun to infiltrate her guarded world. Ethan was seated by a desk cluttered with sketches and drafts of ideas he had jotted down over his many visits. His eyes, ever observant, lifted from his work as she entered. There was an unspoken warmth in the meeting of their gazes, a silent acknowledgement of the fragile progress made between them. He rose and extended his hand in greeting, a gesture that conveyed both respect and hope without the need for elaborate expression. In that moment, the studio transformed into a space of fragile resurrection. The silence was now not empty, but filled with the quiet hum of potential and an understanding that healing was a slow, measured process. Serena felt the stirrings of long, dormant emotions as she moved through the room, touching lightly on surfaces that had once borne witness to the full spectrum of her artistry. Every step seemed imbued with the subtle thrill of rediscovery. Ethan, aware of the significance of each small change, spoke softly. Your art has always been a reflection of the soul, raw, intricate, and resilient. Perhaps today we can try to recapture even a fragment of that passion. His words, carefully chosen, resonated deeply with Serena. They were not a call to abandon caution, but rather an invitation to let a piece of herself emerge from behind the carefully constructed walls of solitude. Moved by his sincerity, she approached a nearly forgotten easel tucked in a quiet corner of the room. Its frame was chipped and worn, but it held the promise of countless untold stories. With deliberate care, Serena set up her paints and brushes, each tool a relic of both past brilliance and present uncertainty. Today was not about grand declarations, it was about rediscovering a connection with the self, a gentle reawakening of a part that had long been silenced by grief. The act of painting, once a wellspring of passion, now appeared as a tentative exploration. Serena dipped her brush into a mixture of hues that ranged from the softest pastels to bolder, more assertive tones. As the bristles met the canvas, there was an immediate transformation. Each stroke was both an act of defiance against the paralysis of old wounds and a quiet embrace of her innate talent. The colors began to meld and swirl, creating a scene that was both abstract and deeply personal. A landscape of memories, hopes, and unspoken truths. Outside the window, the city continued its unhurried march, oblivious to the subtle renaissance unfolding within those walls. Yet inside the studio, every splash of color, every careful line told a story of fragile rebirth. Serena's movements, once mechanical and restrained, grew increasingly confident. The process was gradual, as if she were coaxing forth a long-forgotten melody with each careful touch. Her hands, though still marked by the hesitations of the past, began to exhibit a renewed sense of purpose. Ethan observed the transformation with a mixture of admiration and quiet joy. His own work had always been to chronicle the intimate journey of the soul, and here, before him, was a living testament to that very truth. As he moved around the studio, ensuring that Serena had the space and support needed, he felt that this day was a turning point, a moment when the artistry of pain was slowly being reshaped into a tapestry of hope. They spent hours in a quiet symphony of creativity and shared understanding. Every now and then their eyes would meet, and in that brief exchange lay the unspoken acknowledgement of their intertwined paths. There was no need for overt declarations. The silence itself spoke of the gradual mending of fractures and the slow, deliberate process of reawakening. Serena's strokes became less tentative as she painted, each movement a small victory over the lingering shadows of betrayal. In one instance, as she paused to study the evolving canvas, a memory surfaced, an image of a time when the world was full of possibility and every color sang in unison. The recollection was bittersweet, a reminder of both joy and the inevitability of change. With a measured breath, she allowed the memory to flow into her work, transforming the scene into something that was as much about embracing the past as it was about transcending it. Her eyes shimmered with the quiet intensity of someone rediscovering the beauty in life's impermanence. Ethan, who had been quietly jotting down reflections in his notebook, looked up and said softly, "Your work today feels like a gentle unveiling, a slow, deliberate celebration of who you once were and who you are becoming. It is not a burst of passion, but rather the steady emergence of light after a long night." His words were both a tribute and a promise. In them lay the certainty that even the deepest scars could eventually serve as the foundation for something extraordinary. The conversation that followed was not filled with dramatic revelations, but rather with a series of thoughtful, measured insights. Serena spoke of the difficulty of letting go of old defenses and the challenge of trusting that beauty could still emerge from pain. She recalled moments when her creativity had been suffocated by the heavy hand of loss, and yet, as she observed the interplay of colors on the canvas, she began to see that even the most guarded hearts can be coaxed into a quiet reawakening. Their dialogue meandered like a slow, reflective stream, each thought connecting gently to the next, forming a narrative of healing that was both intimate and universal. Ethan's observations were never overly ornate. Instead, they were sincere and unadorned, reflecting a profound understanding of the human condition. Serena, in turn, found in his words a mirror for her own silent struggles, a reminder that vulnerability, when shared with care, can lead to unexpected beauty. As midday gave way to a languid afternoon, the canvas before them evolved into a vibrant testament to renewal. The imagery was abstract yet evocative, a collage of memories reinterpreted through the lens of hope. Every brushstroke, every carefully chosen color was a silent proclamation that the process of rebirth was underway. The transformation was gradual, subtle, and imbued with the kind of quiet power that often comes only after long periods of introspection. In a pause from their creative exchange, Ethan gathered the wildflowers and placed them gently beside the easel. Their soft petals and tender hues provided a poignant contrast to the bold, determined strokes on the canvas, a delicate reminder that even in the midst of overwhelming change, moments of grace can be found. Serena looked at the flowers, her eyes softening as if in silent gratitude for the reminder that beauty can bloom in the most unexpected of places. Before the day's end, as the shadows grew long and the last light of dusk crept through the studio, Serena stepped back to examine her work. It was far from complete, yet it was unmistakably a beginning, a fragile yet undeniable resurgence of the creative spirit. In that moment, she felt the stirrings of something profound within her, a rekindling of a passion that had once been buried beneath layers of pain and mistrust. Ethan's presence was a constant, reassuring anchor through the entire process. His quiet encouragement and steady companionship had given her the courage to reclaim a part of herself long thought lost. The studio, once a realm of solitude and muted despair, had transformed into a sanctuary where every stroke of the brush was a step toward healing. In that sacred space, the art of resurrection was unfolding with a gentle insistence that left no room for despair. As the evening deepened, they shared a final, quiet moment of reflection, a mutual understanding that this day, with all its small triumphs and tentative gestures, was a vital chapter in a much larger journey. There were no grand pronouncements or dramatic farewells, only the enduring promise that tomorrow would bring further opportunities to build upon the fragile resurrections of today. In the gentle quiet of the closing hours, Serena whispered, "There is something wondrous in the way our past can merge with the present, painting a future that is both fragile and fiercely alive." Ethan's response was a soft nod, his eyes reflecting a deep, abiding hope, a hope that even the most scarred hearts could find their way back to the light. Thus ended another day in the studio, a day that, like the delicate brushstrokes on the canvas, captured the essence of transformation. In the interplay of light and shadow, pain and hope, they had discovered that healing is neither instantaneous nor complete in a single moment. It is a gradual, deliberate act of creation, a fragile resurrection that continues to evolve with every heartbeat, every whisper of remembered love, and every shared moment of quiet understanding. The following day, a pale morning light filtered through the grimy windows of the studio, transforming the space into a gentle tableau of hope and quiet resolve. Serena arrived before the sun had fully claimed the sky, her steps measured yet determined. Every visit had become an unspoken ritual, a deliberate act of reclaiming lost parts of herself, one fragile moment at a time. Inside, the studio was alive with a subtle energy that belied its worn surfaces. The canvases, once forgotten relics, now seemed to hum with possibility, their muted colors ready to be stirred into new creations. Ethan had left a single, neatly folded sheet of paper on a worn wooden table, a fresh sketch of swirling lines and gentle curves that he had produced during the still hours of the night. The drawing, like a whisper of creativity in the quiet darkness, invited Serena to see the world through eyes unclouded by past hurts. Taking the paper into her hands, Serena let her gaze trace every subtle curve, every measured line. In that silent communion with the sketch, memories of days when her own hands had danced freely with color and form stirred in the recesses of her mind. The simplicity of Ethan's creation resonated deeply, serving as both a gentle reminder and an encouragement to explore the uncharted territories of her own imagination. Settling at her work table, she arranged her palette with deliberate care. Each color was chosen not merely for its vibrancy, but for the quiet emotion it evoked, hues that spoke of both loss and the promise of renewal. With careful deliberation, she mixed pigments to form shades that captured the delicate balance between melancholy and hope. The studio, now bathed in the soft morning glow, became a sanctuary where the echoes of past brilliance converged with the fragile spark of a new beginning. Ethan entered the room quietly, his presence a comforting shadow behind her. His eyes, attentive and unassuming, followed the deliberate movements of her brush as it first caressed the blank canvas. There was a ritualistic intimacy in these shared moments, the unspoken understanding that every stroke was both a reclamation and a gentle surrender to vulnerability. He offered no words, preferring instead to let the silence speak for itself, a language built on mutual respect, empathy, and the desire to rebuild. As Serena worked, the canvas began to reflect a subtle evolution of her inner landscape. Faint images emerged, a winding path through a dense forest, the soft glimmer of twilight over a still lake, the delicate interplay of shadow and light. With each careful stroke, the painting transformed from a blank slate into a narrative of rediscovery. The imagery was not overtly symbolic. Rather, it was an abstract interplay of forms and colors that hinted at long-forgotten dreams and gentle aspirations. In moments when her hand paused, Serena would glance at Ethan, silently seeking reassurance. His steady, warm gaze served as a balm to her cautious heart, affirming that even in the delicate act of creation, she was not alone. It was in these instances that she allowed herself to trust a little more, to let the brush reveal not only the surface of the canvas, but the hidden layers of her soul. The work progressed slowly, each detail a testament to the courage it took to face the scars of betrayal and the hope that lay beyond them. The room was filled with an almost tangible sense of anticipation, as if the very air awaited the final flourish of her art. The minutes stretched into hours, each moment punctuated by the soft scratch of the brush against canvas and the quiet hum of the city beyond the studio walls. Outside, the world continued its relentless pace, yet within these four walls, time itself seemed to surrender to the gentle rhythm of renewal. During a rare pause, Serena set her brush aside and leaned back to study her creation. The painting, still unfinished, evoked a cascade of emotions. There were hints of despair, fragments of lost joy, but also glimmers of light that suggested the possibility of healing. It was a visual diary of her internal struggles and the tentative steps she had taken toward mending the fragments of her identity. With a deep, steadying breath, she acknowledged the power of the process. Every hesitant line and deliberate sweep was a dialogue with her own past, a conversation where pain met possibility and regret slowly transformed into quiet determination. Ethan, sensing the weight of the moment, moved closer and gently remarked, "Every stroke here tells a story not of what was lost, but of what is being found anew." His words were soft yet filled with conviction, offering a mirror to the silent revelations unfolding before them. Serena's eyes glistened in response. She knew that her journey was not defined solely by the wounds of yesterday, but by the resilient spirit that dared to dream of tomorrow. They spent the remainder of the morning in a harmonious blend of creativity and introspection. The studio, with its array of scattered sketches and unfinished canvases, bore witness to an evolution that was both raw and exquisitely delicate. Every shared glance, every quiet nod underscored a newfound understanding, one that embraced the inherent fragility of healing and the profound beauty that could emerge from it. As the day advanced, subtle hints of light transformed into the warm hues of late afternoon. The painting, though still a work in progress, had blossomed into a vivid tapestry of emotions. The colors deepened and intermingled in ways that mirrored the complexity of Serena's internal journey, a journey where shadows and light dance in a delicate equilibrium. The act of painting had become a form of catharsis, a way to confront the echoes of her past without being overwhelmed by them. In a quiet, reflective moment, Serena set aside her brush and allowed herself to simply exist in the space that she had created. The silence of the studio, far from being oppressive, now hummed with the soft music of self-discovery. Her eyes roamed over the emerging artwork, and in its abstract beauty, she found both a reflection of her inner turmoil and a promise of a future unburdened by old regrets. Ethan, whose own creative spirit had long been intertwined with the art of listening, gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "It is in this honest confrontation with your past that true renewal is born," he whispered, his tone a blend of encouragement and quiet admiration. His words carried the weight of his own experiences, a shared understanding that the path to healing was often paved with moments of raw vulnerability. For a long while, they remained in that space, immersed in the unspoken language of creativity and shared understanding. The quiet intimacy of the moment was not marked by grand gestures, but by the subtle interplay of light, color, and the steadfast courage to face one's own truth. In that silent communion, Serena felt a deep stirring, a recognition that the journey she had embarked upon was a slow, deliberate process of reawakening. As evening approached and the studio was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, Serena stepped back to consider the day's work. Though incomplete, the painting stood as a tangible testament to her ability to forge new connections between past pain and future hope. It was a visual echo of all that she had experienced, a narrative told in the language of color and texture, inviting both introspection and the quiet promise of renewal. In the fading light, Ethan gathered the few remaining sketches and notes, carefully placing them in a worn folder. His eyes met Serena's one final time before they prepared to leave the studio, an unspoken promise lingering in that shared glance. "Every day here brings a little more truth, a little more beauty to be reclaimed," he said softly. the sincerity in his voice transcending the need for elaboration. With the close of day, as shadows lengthened and the soft murmur of the city provided a gentle backdrop, the studio slowly emptied of its creative bustle, yet within its walls the echoes of renewal continued to resonate, a silent, ongoing testament to the transformative power of art and the indomitable strength of the human spirit. In that quiet hour, as the world outside slipped into the gentle embrace of night, Serena and Ethan carried with them the profound understanding that every brushstroke was a step toward healing. Each shared moment in the studio was a fragile act of defiance against despair, a small, deliberate reawakening of the creative soul, ready to embrace the endless possibilities that lay ahead. Early morning arrived with an unassuming calm that belied the turbulence of memories stirring beneath the surface. Serena awoke to a quiet that seemed to cradle the space between sleep and consciousness, a space where the past and present coexisted without a clear boundary, the remnants of her dreams, fleeting images of lost voices and forgotten laughter, lingered as she prepared herself for another day in the studio, a realm where every moment was a confrontation with both beauty and pain. At the threshold of the day, she hesitated before stepping into the sanctum of creativity. The studio had transformed over the past weeks into more than a repository of abandoned canvases and neglected tools. It was now a living archive of her evolving self. With a deliberate calm, she crossed the threshold, each step resonating with the weight of memories that she had long kept at bay. Her eyes met the familiar chaos of scattered sketches and remnants of past endeavors. They spoke silently of a time when creativity was raw and unrefined, yet infused with passion and vulnerability. Ethan had arrived early, his presence marked by the quiet rustle of paper as he arranged a series of newly drafted pages on an old wooden desk. Today, his focus was not solely on the act of creation, but on capturing the essence of what lay beneath the surface of their shared journey. He was preparing notes for an article that he hoped would intertwine the delicate narratives of pain and perseverance, a tribute to the transformative power of remembering and forgiving. In his careful organization of thoughts, there was an unmistakable dedication to honoring the past without allowing it to dominate the present. Serena paused near a weathered bookshelf, fingers grazing the spines of journals and art critiques that once defined her identity. Each title evoked a chapter of her former life, a time when art was both a shield and a banner, a means of expression that carried the thrill of possibility. Yet, with every touch, she also recalled the betrayals and the moments when trust shattered like fragile glass. In that quiet moment of recollection, she resolved to confront these ghosts head-on, to reclaim the parts of her story that had been relegated to the background. With a quiet determination, she settled at her easel and began to prepare her canvas for a new creation, one that was to capture the unresolved tension between what had been lost and what could be restored. The blank surface, unmarked and expectant, seemed to invite a dialogue with its owner. Each stroke of her hand was an act of defiance against the erosion of time, an attempt to stitch together the fragments of her narrative into something coherent and healing. The colors she selected were deep and resonant, reflecting the myriad emotions she had long suppressed, the ache of nostalgia, the sting of regret, and the tender promise of redemption. As she worked, the steady rhythm of her brush became a kind of incantation, a methodical weaving of sorrow and hope. The studio, once a silent witness to her isolation, now hummed with the energy of transformation. Every pigment blended with another in a quiet conversation, revealing layers of experience that extended far beyond the confines of the canvas. There was an intimacy in the way her hand moved, deliberate and measured, as if each mark was a carefully considered step toward reconciling with a past that had both defined and confounded her. Ethan, seated nearby with a notebook filled with tentative reflections, watched with an attentive gaze that acknowledged the gravity of her creative process. He had learned over time that the act of painting for Serena was more than a mere expression of artistry. It was a journey into the recesses of her being, where shadows of old wounds mingled with the light of newfound understanding. His eyes occasionally met hers, and in those silent exchanges there was a shared recognition of the battle that was being fought on the canvas. No words were exchanged. Instead, they communicated through the unspoken language of empathy and mutual respect. Midday brought a shift in the studio's atmosphere as the natural light strengthened, filling the room with a soft, unyielding brightness. The interplay of light and dark on the canvas mirrored the internal struggle that Serena was gradually unraveling. In the midst of her work, a long-buried memory surfaced, a recollection of a time when she had once trusted unconditionally, before the sting of betrayal had taught her the harsh lessons of vulnerability. The memory was not one of regret alone, but also of the profound beauty that had existed in that openness, a beauty now obscured by layers of caution and hurt. Her hand hesitated for a moment as she considered the implications of allowing that memory to seep into her work. It was a risk, a moment of vulnerability that could either fracture her further or pave the way for healing. With a measured exhale, she decided to embrace the risk. Slowly, her brush began to articulate the contours of that forgotten emotion, a delicate interplay of soft shadows and gentle highlights that lent the painting an air of melancholic grace. Each line was an acknowledgement of what had been lost, yet it also served as an invitation to remember the unguarded moments that had once filled her life with meaning. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his interest deepening as he observed the subtle transformation unfolding before him. His thoughts drifted to his own experiences of loss and recovery, and he silently admired the resilience it took to face such raw truths. He scribbled a few words in his notebook, words that captured the essence of a memory, of the bittersweet interplay between heartache and hope. In that moment, the studio was not merely a place of artistic endeavor, but a crucible where old wounds could be confronted and perhaps slowly healed. In the quiet lull that followed, the atmosphere in the room shifted imperceptibly. Serena's painting had begun to reveal a narrative of duality, of lingering sorrow interwoven with the promise of something more luminous. The bold, unrestrained strokes of color mingled with softer, tentative hues, creating a tapestry that was as conflicted as it was cathartic. It was a story told not through overt declarations, but through the gentle persistence of form and tone. A narrative that spoke of transformation in its most delicate state. As the afternoon wore on, a soft conversation emerged from the backdrop of shared silence. Ethan, his voice low and contemplative, remarked on the courage it took to transmute painful memories into art. "There is a nobility in facing our shadows," he said quietly, his words resonating with an authenticity born of his own struggles. "Every mark you make on that canvas is a tribute to the parts of you that have been hidden for too long." His observation was not an intrusion, but an offering, a validation of the emotional odyssey that Serena was undertaking. Serena, pausing in her work to consider his words, felt the weight of them settle around her like a familiar embrace. "The past has its own gravity," she replied softly, her tone reflective and measured. "Sometimes it feels as if the memories are trying to pull me back into the depths I once inhabited. Yet I find solace in knowing that even the darkest moments can yield something unexpected, an echo of beauty that whispers of hope." Her voice carried the quiet strength of someone who had learned to navigate the labyrinth of her own history, acknowledging the complexity of pain without surrendering to it entirely. Their exchange was not marked by dramatic declarations or ornate language. Instead, it was a simple, honest dialogue between two souls who had come to understand that healing was a process, a continuous act of creation, revision, and sometimes letting go. The room resonated with the truth that every brushstroke, every carefully chosen word, was part of a larger mosaic that was still in the making. As dusk began to draw its gentle veil over the city, Serena stepped back to survey her work. The painting, still unfinished, held within its layers the echoes of a past that had been both a source of sorrow and an impetus for change. There was an undeniable rawness to the piece, the testament to the unvarnished truth that art could embody when it dared to confront the most intimate parts of the human experience. In that moment, the studio became a space where time seemed to suspend its relentless march, allowing both the artist and her companion to linger in the delicate balance between memory and hope. Ethan closed his notebook with a soft resolve, his gaze lingering on the painting as if committing every detail to memory. "The journey is far from over," he observed quietly, acknowledging that the path to healing was a continuum of small victories and fragile reconciliations. "But each moment, each stroke, brings you closer to reclaiming the parts of yourself that were never truly lost." His affirmation was both an encouragement and a recognition of the intricate work that lay ahead, a work that demanded patience, empathy, and a willingness to see beauty even in the midst of struggle. With the approaching night, the studio's atmosphere grew more introspective. As the studio door closed behind her, Serena stepped out into the cool embrace of the evening, carrying with her the quiet weight of a day spent in honest confrontation with her past. The city around her whispered promises of new beginnings and silent understandings, urging her forward along a path that was as uncertain as it was hopeful. In that final moment of twilight, she allowed herself to believe that while shadows of the past might never vanish completely, they could, with time, become the very contours that shaped a more resilient, luminous. A subtle tension clung to the air as the morning arrived, heralding a new day of quiet exploration and shared vulnerability. Serena awoke to the delicate interplay of dawn's first light and the gentle murmur of the city stirring in the distance. The night had offered her a brief respite, a pause in the ongoing internal dialogue between past wounds and emerging hope. Today, the promise of renewal was tangible, as if the very air around her vibrated with a silent invitation to move forward. After a slow, thoughtful breakfast in the modest apartment that served as both refuge and retreat, Serena made her way to the studio, a space that had evolved into a crucible of transformation over the past weeks. Each visit to that familiar haven had become a step in a quiet pilgrimage towards self-reclamation, and today was no different. The familiar creak of the wooden door, the soft hum of distant urban life, and the delicate glow of early sunlight all conspired to infuse the space with an almost sacred atmosphere. Inside the studio, subtle changes hinted at a transformation, both external and internal. Canvases leaned against the walls in various states of completion, their layered textures speaking to the myriad emotions captured in every stroke. Today, however, there was an added element of intention. Ethan had arranged a small cluster of ceramic figurines on a corner shelf, each one a symbol of renewal, representing abstract forms of growth, struggle, and eventual rebirth. Their presence was an unspoken acknowledgement that while the journey had been fraught with pain, it was also filled with possibilities waiting to be embraced. Serena moved slowly toward her easel, the soft patter of her footsteps echoing gently in the quiet room. Today, her mind was awash with reflections from the previous day. The interplay of shadows and light on her latest painting, the raw expression of memory and hope intermingled on the surface of the canvas. There was a clarity in her thoughts that had been absent in earlier days, a recognition that the process of creation was as much about embracing the fragile present as it was about exorcising the ghosts of the past. Ethan was already at his work table, a notebook open before him and a pen poised to capture the ephemeral impressions of the morning, his eyes, ever attuned to the subtle shifts in Serena's creative process, lifted to meet her as she approached the easel. There was a quiet exchange in that look, a mutual acknowledgement of the delicate work that lay ahead. With a slight, respectful nod, she settled into her familiar position and began preparing her palette. Today's canvas was blank, inviting not only color and form but also the tender, unguarded expression of her inner landscape. Serena selected a series of pigments that resonated with her current mood. Deep indigos mingled with warm ambers, cool cerulean hues softened by hints of gentle rose. Each choice was deliberate, a quiet testament to the balance she was striving to achieve between mourning and hope. As she mixed the colors, her movements were measured and intentional, as if each blend was a step in a carefully choreographed ritual of healing. While Serena began to lay the foundation of her new work, Ethan settled into a quiet vigil by a large window that framed the unfolding morning. Outside, the city was awakening, a gentle chorus of distant car horns, the rustle of leaves stirred by an early breeze, and the soft exclamations of pedestrians beginning their daily journeys. In that moment, the urban cacophony melded with the silent creativity of the studio, forming a backdrop that was both external and profoundly internal. As Serena's brush first touched the canvas, the studio was filled with an unspoken language, a delicate interplay of color and form that conveyed the echoes of forgotten dreams and the resilient pulse of a heart learning to trust again. The strokes were neither hurried nor hesitant. They were the measured expressions of someone who had learned that healing could be both slow and transformative. Each mark was imbued with the quiet determination to reclaim a part of herself that had been buried under layers of hurt. Ethan, captivated by the unfolding scene, began to jot down reflections in his notebook. His observations were gentle and respectful, mirroring the mood of the studio. In the way light fractures through stained glass, he wrote, there is a beauty in imperfection, a reminder that every broken piece can be rearranged to reveal a mosaic of hope. His words were not an analysis of art, but rather a tribute to the inherent resilience of the human spirit, a quality he saw mirrored in Serena's evolving masterpiece. Midway through the morning, as the canvas began to fill with swirls of color and emerging shapes, a subtle change came over Serena. The memory of past betrayals, once a constant weight on her heart, seemed to lift ever so slightly, replaced by a cautious optimism. In the interplay of cool and warm tones, she began to depict a landscape that was as much about internal reconciliation. The emerging image was abstract, a blend of fluid lines that hinted at both turbulent emotions and the promise of a new horizon. It was not a literal representation of her past, but rather a symbolic rendering of the complex emotions that lay beneath the surface. Ethan watched, his gaze filled with admiration for the courage it took to bare one's soul through art. He approached quietly, standing a respectful distance away so as not to disrupt her creative flow. "There is a tenderness in the way you allow yourself to be vulnerable," he remarked softly, his tone an affirmation rather than an analysis. "It is in these moments that the true essence of art is revealed, not in the absence of pain, but in the quiet acceptance that every scar tells a story of survival." His words, chosen with care, carried a resonance that deepened the already charged atmosphere. Encouraged by his gentle presence, Serena paused and regarded him with a look that was both grateful and introspective. In that shared silence, a mutual understanding passed between them, a recognition that while the scars of the past might always linger, they could also serve as the foundation for a future imbued with quiet strength. It was a moment of rare connection where the boundaries between artist and observer blurred into a shared experience of hope and renewal. For the remainder of the morning, the studio was filled with a delicate symphony of creativity. Serena's brush danced across the canvas with a rhythm that echoed the cadence of her heartbeat, steady, resilient, and quietly determined. The emerging painting was not merely an image, but an unfolding narrative of personal evolution, a chronicle of the struggle to transcend pain and embrace the light of a new day. Every line, every splash of color was a testament to the transformative power of art, a process that required both surrender and resolve. Ethan continued to record his thoughts, his reflections interspersed with quiet observations of the subtle nuances in Serena's technique. He noted the gradual shift in her expression, the softening of a furrowed brow, the way her eyes lingered on the evolving shapes, as if searching for hidden meanings. His words captured not just the physical process of creation, but the emotional journey that was steadily unfolding in tandem with the painting. In his notebook, he traced the evolution of her work alongside his own internal reflections on what it meant to confront one's past and emerge, if only gradually, into the light. As the day advanced, the morning's quiet promise gave way to the fuller light of midday. The studio, now filled with the vibrancy of a canvas brought to life, echoed with the quiet celebration of creativity, a testament to the beauty that can arise from the interplay of loss and hope. Serena's painting, still evolving with every measured stroke, stood as a vivid narrative of the delicate balance between remembering and renewing. It was an artful exploration of the spaces where pain had once resided, now gently transformed into corridors of resilience. When at last Serena set down her brush, she stepped back to view the work in its entirety. It was far from finished, a living, breathing testament to the process of healing that could never be rushed or fully encapsulated by a single image. Yet, in its incomplete form, the painting radiated a profound truth that every day offered a new opportunity to reshape one's narrative, to allow the shadows of yesterday to recede in the gentle embrace of dawn. Ethan moved to join her at the easel, his presence both grounding and encouraging. Together they stood in quiet reflection, allowing the moment to settle around them like a soft cloak. "Your art speaks in a language that transcends words," he said quietly, his voice filled with sincere admiration. "In every brushstroke there is a whisper of tomorrow, a promise that even the darkest memories can give way to the light of a new beginning." His words, though simple, carried the weight of shared experience, a mutual acknowledgement of the fragile beauty that lay in embracing life's impermanence. In the soft aftermath of their creative communion, the studio fell into a reflective silence. Outside, the day moved inexorably onward, yet within these four walls, time had slowed to a deliberate, meaningful pace. The journey of healing, they both knew, was one of small, deliberate steps, a continuous dialogue between the heart and the soul, captured in the interplay of color, form, and the tender cadence of hope. As the final light of the day began to wane, Serena carefully covered her painting, a symbolic gesture of preserving the day's revelations while anticipating the promise of tomorrow. With a quiet smile and a renewed sense of purpose, she gathered her tools, mindful that each step forward was a victory over the shadows of her past. Ethan, too, collected his notes, his eyes meeting hers in a silent exchange that conveyed both respect and optimism. In that lingering twilight, as the studio door closed behind them, both Serena and Ethan stepped out into the cool embrace of the evening, with hearts a little lighter and souls a bit more attuned to the gentle whispers of dawn. The day had been a quiet celebration of vulnerability and courage, a reminder that even in the midst of lingering shadows, the promise of new beginnings was never far away. The evening air carried the scent of rain, though the skies held nothing but scattered clouds. Serena stood by her studio window watching the city below as headlights flickered like distant fireflies. Her fingers hovered over the edge of a ceramic cup, untouched tea cooling with each passing moment. It had been a long day, one filled with progress, but also with an unsettling awareness of how fragile this newfound momentum truly was. Ethan's words from earlier still lingered in her mind. Your art speaks in a language that transcends words. There had been no false praise in his tone, only quiet admiration, but it had stirred something in her, something that made her uneasy. The more she let Ethan into her world, the more she felt the boundaries of her solitude eroding, and with them, the illusion of safety she had built for herself. She reached for her phone before she could think better of it. Scrolling through unread messages was a habit she rarely indulged, but tonight a restless energy filled her. Most of them were old inquiries about her work, invitations she had ignored, remnants of a life she had turned away from. Yet, among them, a familiar name surfaced. Julian. Her stomach tightened. It had been years since she'd last spoken to him, yet his name still held the weight of all that had been lost. Against her better judgment, she opened the message. I saw your name in an article today. Something about your old work resurfacing in an upcoming feature. I suppose it was inevitable. You can't hide from the world forever, Serena. She stared at the screen, fingers tightening around the phone. Inevitable. The word tasted bitter. Julian had always spoken in absolutes, in carefully crafted lines that cut through her defenses with surgical precision. Even now, after everything, his voice still reached her like an echo from the past. A sharp knock on the studio door pulled her from her thoughts. She knew before opening it that it would be Ethan. He had a way of arriving at the precise moment she felt most unsteady, as though he could sense when she was withdrawing into herself. She hesitated before unlocking the door. When she pulled it open, Ethan stood on the other side, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression that hovered between concern and something softer, something unreadable. You looked tired when I left, he said simply. I thought you might need this. Serena took the offered cup without a word, stepping aside to let him in. She wasn't sure why she allowed it, why she didn't send him away like she had so many others. Perhaps it was because he never demanded anything from her. He didn't pry, didn't push. He simply was, existing in the space she had so carefully guarded without disturbing it. Ethan set his own cup down before leaning against one of the paint-stained tables. Long night? Serena gave a non-committal nod, taking a slow sip of coffee. The warmth did little to ease the tension in her chest. I saw your name trending earlier, Ethan continued, his voice carefully neutral. An art journalist mentioned one of your older pieces in an upcoming gallery retrospective. You didn't know? She exhaled sharply, setting the coffee down before crossing her arms. No, but I should have expected it. People love digging up ghosts. Ethan studied her for a moment before tilting his head slightly. And does it bother you? She almost laughed. Did it bother her that the world had not forgotten what she so desperately wanted to leave behind? That even now, after years of silence, her past had the power to reach her in the form of a simple message from Julian? It doesn't matter, she murmured, turning away. None of it changes anything. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, as if sensing the weight of what she wasn't saying, he asked, Who was he? Serena stiffened. Who? The person behind that look in your eyes right now. She closed her eyes briefly, fingers pressing into her arms. Ethan's words were careful, gentle, but they landed with precision. He was perceptive, always watching, always listening. She had underestimated just how much he saw. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she replied, Julian. Ethan didn't interrupt. He didn't ask the obvious questions. What happened? Who was he to you? Why does he still haunt you? Instead, he waited. And perhaps that patience was what made her speak. He was the one who taught me that art isn't always about beauty, she said finally, staring at the unfinished canvas on her easel. Sometimes it's about destruction. She felt Ethan shift, but he remained silent, letting her continue. We built everything together, she murmured. He was my partner in every sense of the word, personally, professionally. We created, we challenged each other. We believed we were unstoppable. A hollow laugh escaped her lips. And maybe we were. Until I became something he couldn't control, the memory surfaced like a wound reopened. The gallery that had once been theirs, the critics who had whispered her name with admiration, the night she had stood before an audience that saw her, not Julian, not their partnership, but her. And the way he had looked at her in that moment, like she had betrayed him simply by existing beyond his shadow. He took everything, she whispered, and when he left, all I had left was silence. The words sat between them, heavy and raw. For the first time, she realized she had never spoken them out loud. Not like this. Not in a way that acknowledged the full weight of what had been stolen from her. Ethan exhaled softly, his gaze steady. "And now," he asked, "do you still believe that's all you have left?" She turned to him, and for the first time, she didn't have an answer. Because the truth was, in the quiet moments spent painting again, in the weight of Ethan's presence that somehow steadied rather than suffocated her, in the simple act of opening the door instead of locking it, something had shifted. The silence no longer felt like an ending. It felt like the space before something new. Ethan watched her carefully, then gave a small nod as if he understood what she wasn't saying. He reached for his coffee again, but didn't press further. He didn't need to. The truth had already been spoken. And for now, that was enough. Serena turned back to her canvas, fingers brushing against the edge. It was incomplete, much like herself, but for the first time in years, she saw possibility instead of ruin. And as the night deepened around them, she allowed herself to believe just for a moment that perhaps, just perhaps, there was still something worth creating after all. A muted rain tapped softly against the studio windows, its rhythmic pattern mirroring the steady pulse of recollection within Serena. As the echoes of last night's conversation with Ethan slowly faded into the quiet hours of the early morning, she found herself alone with memories too persistent to ignore. The rain, rather than a source of sorrow, became a gentle companion, each droplet a tiny messenger carrying fragments of the past, urging her to confront the depths of her own experience. Seated before an untouched canvas, Serena hesitated. In the dim light of dawn, the studio held a sense of raw vulnerability, a liminal space where the past and present intertwined. Today was not just any day, it was a day to revisit the mosaic of moments that had both shaped and scarred her. With measured breath and trembling resolve, she reached for her palette, selecting hues that resonated with emotions too intricate to name outright. Deep cerulean merged with muted sienna, while hints of emerald and rust whispered of both nostalgia and a tentative hope. As her brush first met the blank surface, a surge of recollections enveloped her. Every stroke became an act of remembrance, a subtle defiance against the relentless passage of time. The painting began as a series of abstract lines, twisting, overlapping, and intermingling like the tangled paths of her former life. With each delicate movement, Serena allowed herself to see not just the pain of betrayal, but also the beauty of moments when love and creation had converged. These early brushstrokes, tentative yet determined, captured the landscape of memories that spanned decades, whispered promises, quiet laughter in crowded galleries, and the fierce passion of shared dreams. Outside, the rain intensified, its cadence echoing the rhythm of her heartbeat. In that sound, she heard a familiar refrain, a bittersweet reminder of Julian, the man whose presence had once illuminated her world and later cast it into darkness. His absence had carved a chasm in her soul, one that still resonated with every stroke of her brush. The pain of his departure, laced with the sting of betrayal, mingled with the tender recollections of what they had built together. And so as her art unfolded before her eyes, Serena found herself compelled to let those memories breathe once more. Her mind drifted back to a time when Julian's smile had lit up a room, when the vibrancy of his creativity had intertwined with hers, creating masterpieces that defied convention. They had been inseparable in spirit, partners in every sense, challenging each other to explore uncharted territories of imagination and emotion. Yet, as she recalled those golden hours, a sharp pang of loss cut through the reverie. Julian had left, leaving behind a legacy of shattered dreams and a silence that had threatened to engulf her entirely. In the quiet solitude of the studio, Serena's thoughts took on the form of a silent dialogue. "I remember the nights when every brushstroke felt like a declaration of our shared passion," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gentle patter of rain. "But even the brightest flame can flicker and die when nurtured by betrayal." Each recollection was a double-edged sword, reminding her of both the brilliance of their union and the inexorable ache that followed his departure. Determined to transmute the raw emotion into something tangible, she began to layer her work with new textures. The canvas transformed gradually from abstract lines into a series of interwoven images. Each a symbol of moments past, a pale silhouette emerged, representing the fleeting memory of a long-forgotten embrace. A bold streak of crimson recalled the intensity of love before it turned to ruin, and a subtle wash of silver evoked the quiet grief that had settled in her heart after Julian's betrayal. With every layer, Serena felt a small measure of catharsis, a step toward reconciling the fragmented pieces of her identity. Midday light filtered through the rain-soaked windows, casting a gentle glow upon the evolving painting. It was then that Ethan reappeared, his presence as unassuming and steady as ever. He approached silently, his eyes soft with compassion as he observed the raw artistry unfolding before him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The language of art had rendered words unnecessary, yet the shared silence was pregnant with unspoken understanding, a tacit acknowledgement that this process, painful though it was essential for her healing. Ethan finally broke the silence, his voice a soft murmur that resonated with genuine care. "Your work today is a tapestry of memories," he said, gesturing lightly toward the canvas. "It captures not only what you've lost, but also what remains, a resilience that refuses to be forgotten." His words, though simple, carried a profound affirmation. In that moment, Serena realized that the act of remembering was not solely an exercise in mourning, it was also an act of reclaiming herself. Every recollection, every bittersweet fragment of the past, had its place in the mosaic of her life, each contributing to the strength she was slowly rebuilding. Encouraged by his validation, Serena allowed herself to delve deeper into her emotions. She recalled the moments when Julian's influence had driven her to explore bold new styles, when their collaborative energy had produced art that defied conventional boundaries. Those days, vibrant with passion and risk, now shone through the layers of pain like shards of broken light. "I still feel his presence in every stroke," she confessed quietly, more to herself than to Ethan. "It's as though his ghost walks beside me, urging me to remember what we once created, even as I mourn what was lost." Her admission was raw, unfiltered, a testament to the enduring power of memory. As the afternoon wore on, the painting evolved into a visual narrative of complexity and contrast. The interplay of light and dark, of warmth and coolness, mirrored the internal conflict that had defined Serena's journey thus far. The work was far from finished, yet it pulsed with a life of its own, a tangible record of her struggle to navigate the labyrinth of memory and forgiveness. With each deliberate stroke, she reclaimed a fragment of herself that had been obscured by the canvas. Once a barren expanse, now shimmered with the hues of resilience, its every detail a silent ode to the transformative power of art. In the final hours of the day, as twilight descended and the rain gradually subsided, Serena stepped back to survey her creation. The painting in its unfinished splendor bore the marks of a long, arduous journey, a journey through the shadows of loss into the tentative light of remembrance. It was an honest chronicle of both pain and hope, a testament to the idea that even fractured hearts could be mended with the threads of memory and a willingness to embrace the past. Ethan approached once more, standing quietly at her side as they both regarded the canvas. "It's beautiful," he murmured, his tone reverent yet gentle. "Every line, every color speaks of your strength. The echoes of yesterday are woven into a story that is uniquely yours, a story that, despite everything, continues to evolve." His praise was not an attempt to erase the pain, but to honor it, acknowledging that the scars of the past were integral to the masterpiece of who she had become. In that moment, as the last vestiges of daylight faded into the embrace of night, Serena allowed herself a small, fragile smile. The painting was not a panacea, a cure for the wounds of the past, but it was a vital step in the journey toward healing. It was proof that even in the midst of loss and betrayal, there remained the capacity to create beauty out of the ruins. As she gently cleaned her brushes and stored her paints for the evening, Serena felt a quiet determination settle over her. The threads of remembrance woven through her art were not chains that bound her to old sorrows. Rather, they were the fabric of her identity, a tapestry rich with history, emotion, and the promise of renewal. And tight as the studio lay quiet once more, she would rest, knowing that every painful memory had a place in her heart, not as a source of perpetual grief, but as a reminder of her enduring capacity to rise again. The sky was a tapestry of deepening blues and turbulent grays as twilight settled over the city, casting elongated shadows across the studio's worn floorboards. Tonight, the air carried a charge that hinted at both impending upheaval and the promise of transformation. Serena sat before an old wooden desk, her eyes fixed on a single unopened envelope. Its envelope bore an unfamiliar stamp, a mark of urgency that disrupted the gentle rhythm of her recollections. Now, before you ask, are there specific objects here? The message inside, she suspected, would carry the weight of secrets yet untold. and stir the still waters of her carefully rebuilt world. Ethan, who had been organizing his notes in a corner, noticed her lingering gaze on the envelope. His concern was immediate and quiet, a familiar instinct born of months spent watching Serena navigate the delicate balance between vulnerability and resilience. "Serena," he began softly, approaching her with measured steps, "is everything all right?" His tone was gentle, but laced with a quiet determination to support her regardless of the storms that might come. She hesitated, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the envelope. "It's from Julian," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The revelation sent a ripple of tension through the room, a mixture of dread and a reluctant curiosity that could not be easily ignored. Julian, whose name had long been a specter in her memories, now reappeared in a form that promised disruption to her fragile equilibrium. Serena's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. Had he finally decided to offer an explanation for his betrayal? Or was this another attempt to claw his way back into her life, to reassert a control that once suffocated her spirit? The envelope was heavy with implication, and its presence stirred emotions she had thought were subdued by months of artistic catharsis. With a deep, steadying breath, she slid a letter opener through the seal and unfolded the crisp paper within. The letter was written in a familiar, elegant hand, a hand that once promised endless possibility but now bore the sting of regret. Julian's words were measured and filled with an emotion that teetered between remorse and the desperate need for absolution. He spoke of lost time, of the irretrievable moments they had shared, and of a longing that had withstood the test of distance and betrayal. Yet interwoven through the lines was a plea, an appeal for forgiveness, not as a means to resurrect what had been, but to offer a parting solace for the wounds he had inflicted. As Serena read, the room seemed to close in around her, each word a reminder of a past that still clung to her like a shadow. The letter was a tempest in ink, a fierce outpouring of regret that conflicted with her hard-won sense of renewal. Ethan, standing silently by her side, watched the play of emotions on her face, a tightening around the eyes, a fleeting furrow of the brow, and the slow, almost imperceptible quiver of her lip. In that moment, he understood that this was a turning point, one that demanded an honest reckoning with the ghosts that had haunted her for so long. For long minutes, silence reigned in the studio, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city and the soft rustle of paper as Serena reread a line or two. Her mind swirled with conflicted thoughts. The pain of betrayal, the memories of passionate artistry shared with Julian, and the newfound serenity she had worked so hard to achieve with Ethan's steady presence. The letter, with its conflicting promises and unspoken sorrow, challenged the very foundations of her healing. Finally, she looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and asked, "Why now?" The question was both an inquiry and a challenge, a defiant cry against the intrusion of past sorrows into the present moment of hope. Ethan's voice, steady and compassionate, filled the space between them. "Maybe he's trying to set things right," he said gently, though his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. "Or perhaps it's just another attempt to unsettle you." His words were not meant to offer a definitive answer, but to acknowledge the complexity of the emotions that now lay before them. Serena's gaze drifted to the window, where the tempest outside mirrored the storm within. The rain had begun again, a steady, relentless cascade that blurred the outlines of the world beyond the glass. In the sound of the rain, she found a strange kinship with the turbulence of her own feelings. "I've spent so long trying to leave that world behind," she murmured, "to build something new from the ashes of my old self. And now it feels like everything is threatened by a storm from the past." The admission hung in the air, raw and unadorned. Ethan stepped closer, his presence a quiet assurance that she was not alone. "Your past is a part of you, Serena," he said softly, "but it doesn't have to define your future. You have the power to choose how much space it occupies in your life." His words were deliberate, imbued with the wisdom of his own journey, a journey that had taught him that healing was not about erasing history, but about learning to live with it in a way that allowed for growth. For hours they discussed the letter, its nuances, its implications, and the path that lay ahead. Serena shared memories of moments both tender and excruciating, of a time when Julian's influence had been a source of both artistic inspiration and deep-seated pain. Each revelation was a step toward understanding the complexity of her own emotions, a delicate unraveling of the knots that had tied her to a past filled with both brilliance and betrayal. As the night deepened, the conversation shifted from the cold ink on paper to the warmth of shared hopes for the future. Ethan encouraged her to view the letter not as an intrusion, but as an opportunity, a catalyst for final closure. "You deserve to heal completely," he said, his voice imbued with conviction. "Sometimes letting go means facing the parts of us we'd rather forget and then choosing to move forward with a clearer understanding of who we are." Serena listened, absorbing his words as if they were the first gentle rays of dawn breaking through a long, oppressive night. Slowly, she began to see that this letter, painful as it was, might be the key to releasing the lingering grip of old wounds. In the act of confronting the betrayal head-on, she could reclaim the narrative of her own life. The tempest outside gradually subsided, leaving behind a stillness that mirrored the newfound calm beginning to settle within her heart. With the letter laid out on the table between them, Serena reached a quiet decision. "I'm going to respond," she declared, her voice steady despite the underlying tremor of vulnerability. "Not to reopen the wounds, but to acknowledge that I have lived through it all. I want to set a boundary, a final farewell to that chapter of my life." Her decision was a bold step, one that symbolized not a reopening of old scars, but a deliberate act of reclaiming her future. Ethan offered a supportive smile, his eyes reflecting both admiration and hope. "I'll be here every step of the way," he promised softly. "This is your story, Serena, and you have the strength to write its next chapter." In the quiet that followed, the envelope now lay open on the desk, its contents having sparked a transformation in her spirit. The tumult of memories had not vanished, but they were beginning to integrate into a broader narrative, a narrative that embraced both the pain of the past and the limitless potential of tomorrow. Outside, the final drops of rain shimmered in the glow of streetlights, a delicate reminder that even the fiercest storms eventually yield to the promise of a new dawn. As the night waned, Serena sat back and drafted her response with careful deliberation. A letter that would serve as both closure and a declaration of independence. In those measured words, she wove together the threads of remorse, forgiveness, and an unwavering commitment to her own well-being. It was not a letter of reconciliation, but rather a farewell to a part of her history that had once held too much power over her. When she finally set down her pen, the studio was bathed in the soft luminescence of early morning. The tempest of change had passed, leaving behind a serene clarity. With Ethan by her side, Serena felt ready to embrace the future. A future defined not by the ghosts of betrayal, but by the resilient spirit that had emerged through the storm. The morning unfolded with a stark clarity that contrasted the emotional storm of the previous night. Serena awoke with a heavy yet determined heart, aware that the response to Julian's letter marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that would define her on her own terms. The studio, now both a sanctuary and a crucible of transformation, waited silently for her next creation, its walls bearing witness to her evolving spirit. After a quiet breakfast, Serena sat at the same weathered desk where she had drafted her reply. The letter from Julian lay on one side, its ink still dark with the residue of old regrets, while her own response, tentative yet resolute, took shape on a fresh sheet of paper. This was not merely a rejection of the past, it was an assertion of her independence. Each word she inscribed was a deliberate severance from the chains of memory that had once threatened to bind her. In that act of writing, she reclaimed the narrative of her own life. Ethan arrived quietly, his presence both reassuring and respectful. He had come not to offer solutions, but to accompany her on this solitary journey. His eyes, attentive and gentle, observed her work without interrupting the delicate balance of thought and emotion that filled the room. "Your words have a strength that goes beyond the ink on the page," he said softly, his voice measured and kind. "They speak of a spirit that refuses to be defined by the past." Serena paused, allowing his words to linger in the charged silence. She recalled the moments when Julian's influence had shaped her art and her life, moments that had now become part of a silent inheritance, memories that were both a legacy and a burden. Today, however, she chose to see that inheritance as a collection of lessons rather than a ledger of sorrows. Every brushstroke and every word she had written in the past had contributed to her current self, but none would dictate her future. With a final flourish, she signed her reply. The act was both cathartic and definitive. Placing the letter in an envelope, she felt a subtle lightness, as if the weight of unspoken anguish was gradually being replaced by an emerging sense of autonomy. Ethan, ever the quiet observer, offered a small nod of encouragement. "This is a turning point," he remarked, "a moment where you have taken control of what once threatened to define you." Later that day, the studio buzzed with the muted energy of creation. Serena returned to her easel, the remnants of the past mingling with the promise of a reborn self. Today, she began a new canvas, one that would embody her silent inheritance in a way that honored both the pain and the strength it had fostered. Her brush moved with a deliberate cadence, each stroke capturing not only the raw textures of memory, but also the vibrant hues of resilience. The painting took shape as an interplay of contrasting elements, stark lines juxtaposed with soft washes of color, mirroring the duality of her experiences. While working, Serena's mind wandered to the many moments that had led her here. There were days when the echo of Julian's voice had haunted her, a reminder of promises broken and trust betrayed. There were also moments of sublime creation when the agony of loss had transformed into art that spoke of the unyielding human spirit. This silent inheritance was not simply a collection of scars. It was the very essence of her journey. In every shadow cast on the canvas, she found the trace of a lesson learned, a moment of vulnerability that had ultimately fortified her resolve. Ethan remained nearby, sometimes offering a word of quiet insight, sometimes simply observing as the painting unfolded. His presence, constant and unassuming, reminded her that the future was not solely hers to bear. Sometimes, the most profound inheritance isn't a relic of sorrow, but the resilience to transform it, he remarked once, his tone blending empathy with quiet wisdom. The day slipped by in a series of measured breaths and decisive actions. Serena's new creation grew into a tapestry of emotions, a vivid narrative that wove together her past experiences with the emerging promise of self-determination. The canvas, now adorned with intricate patterns and deliberate abstractions, was a declaration of survival. It was an artful repudiation of a past that had once sought to imprison her, and a testament to the enduring power of the human will to transcend. As dusk approached, the studio was bathed in the soft glow of fading light. Serena stepped back from her work, eyes scanning the completed forms and subtle textures that now adorned the canvas. There was no grand flourish or dramatic flourish, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had, in some small way, transformed her inheritance into something uniquely beautiful. The painting was not a final statement, it was an ongoing dialogue, a visual record of a journey that continued beyond the confines of a single moment. Ethan joined her at the easel, and together they stood in a shared silence that conveyed the depth of their connection. "Your art today speaks of liberation," he observed, his voice low and sincere. "It is a reminder that while we carry our past within us, it need not confine us." Serena allowed herself a small, reflective smile. In that moment, the shadows of yesterday seemed to recede, replaced by the gentle certainty of tomorrow. Her silent inheritance, once a source of perpetual sorrow, had become the raw material from which she was building a future defined by her own terms. The studio, with its clutter of brushes, scattered sketches, and evolving canvases, had transformed into an arena where pain and hope danced in measured steps. Later, as night embraced the city, Serena carefully packaged her finished painting. It would be exhibited in a small local gallery, a modest yet significant step toward reintroducing her renewed self to a world that had once seemed hostile. The exhibition was not meant to reopen old wounds, but to celebrate the strength born from them. It was a public declaration that while the past remained a part of her, it was no longer its master. In the quiet moments that followed as she prepared to leave the studio, Serena felt a calm resolve settle over her. The journey of healing was far from complete, and the silent inheritance of her past would always linger in the corners of her memory. Yet, in that gentle acceptance lay the power to shape a future unburdened by regret. With Ethan's steadfast support and the newfound clarity that shone through every carefully placed brushstroke, she stepped into the night, ready to meet tomorrow with a heart unafraid to embrace both its pain and its promise. Under a sky that alternated between calm blues and lingering hints of twilight, the gallery opened its doors to an audience that came seeking art and stories untold. The building, a renovated relic of a once grand era, pulsed with an atmosphere of quiet anticipation. Inside, the walls were adorned with pieces of creative expression that spoke of transformation, resilience, and the complex interplay between memory and hope. Among these treasures, Serena's new work was set to debut, a canvas that had absorbed her silent inheritance and transmuted it into a bold declaration of self-reclamation. Serena arrived early, her steps measured as she navigated the polished marble floors of the gallery. The space was alive with subtle energy. Soft murmurs intermingled with the gentle clink of glasses and the rustle of evening attire. She paused before her designated display, a pristine wall carefully illuminated by recessed lights that cast a focused glow on the painting. There, her creation hung in quiet dignity, its intricate layers and deliberate brushstrokes inviting observers to explore the narrative woven into its very fabric. For Serena, this moment was a culmination of countless hours spent in solitude, an arduous journey marked by both creative despair and the incremental spark of renewal. Every line and hue on the canvas told a story, a memory of betrayal, a fragment of lost dreams, and ultimately, the fierce determination to rise above it all. The painting was neither an apology nor an act of defiance. It was an honest exposition of her soul, captured in colors that whispered of both sorrow and the promise of tomorrow. Ethan, who had become her unwavering pillar of support throughout this transformative period, arrived quietly by her side, his eyes reflecting both admiration and gentle understanding, scanned the room before settling on her work. "It's remarkable," he murmured, his voice steady as he gestured toward the painting. "Every stroke speaks of a journey reclaimed." His words, sincere and understated, filled the space with an air of shared victory, a testament to the power of artistic resilience. As the evening unfolded, the gallery gradually filled with guests, curators, art enthusiasts, and local critics, each drawn by the allure of a story that was both raw and redemptive. Conversations sparked in quiet corners, and eyes lingered on the artwork that formed the centerpiece of the exhibition. The atmosphere was one of reverence and curiosity, as if the room itself had become a sanctuary where personal histories could be celebrated rather than hidden. Serena mingled among the crowd with a composed grace, though her heart beat steadily with a mix of anticipation and quiet vulnerability. She listened as attendees discussed the layers of meaning in her work, their interpretations varied yet unified by a common thread of empathy. One visitor remarked on the delicate interplay of light and shadow, noting that it evoked not only the pain of bygone days, but also the subtle glow of emerging hope. Another commented on the bold, almost defiant red accents, suggesting they were a symbolic counterpoint to the muted blues and grays. A visual metaphor for the unyielding spirit that persists despite loss. Throughout the evening, Serena found herself engaged in intimate conversations that delved into the genesis of her art. A particularly thoughtful critic approached her, his gaze steady and curious. "Your piece is not merely a depiction of the past," he observed quietly. "It is a dialogue with memory, a conversation where pain is acknowledged, yet it is transformed into a celebration of what endures." His words resonated deeply with Serena. In that moment, she realized that her art had transcended the confines of personal sorrow. It had become a mirror reflecting a universal journey, a narrative that many could relate to, even if only in fragments. Ethan remained at her side, his presence a constant reminder that the road to redemption was often navigated with both courage and companionship. His eyes met hers frequently, exchanging silent affirmations that spoke of trust and a shared vision for the future. When a group of young artists approached, eager to learn about the techniques behind her work, Serena took a measured breath and explained her process with clarity and conviction. "Every mark on this canvas is a step toward reclaiming a part of myself," she said softly, her voice steady as she recounted the evolution of her creative journey. "It is in embracing both the scars and the triumphs that I have found my voice once more." As the evening deepened, the initial excitement of the opening gave way to a reflective calm. The hum of conversation softened, and the gallery seemed to settle into a meditative stillness. In this quiet moment, Serena stepped away from the crowd and sought solace in a secluded corner of the exhibition space. There, beneath the muted glow of a solitary lamp, she allowed herself a moment of introspection, a silent acknowledgement of the path she had traversed. The memories of long nights spent battling despair, of brushes and pigments that had become her confidants, converge in her mind to form a tapestry of experience that was as painful as it was beautiful. Ethan joined her in that quiet enclave, his hand resting gently on her shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. "Tonight," he said softly, "you have not only shared your art but your truth. That is something profoundly courageous." His words, measured and sincere, wrapped around her like a warm embrace. A reminder that while the echoes of the past may persist, they no longer wield the power to define her. In that moment, Serena felt a quiet liberation, a stirring of hope that mingled with the remnants of past grief. The exhibition was not just an event, it was a turning point. It represented the culmination of a long, arduous process of self-discovery and healing, a public reclamation of a narrative that had once been overshadowed by betrayal and loss. Every visitor who paused before her painting was, in essence, bearing witness to her resilience, a testament to the idea that art can transform even the deepest wounds into sources of inspiration. As the night drew to a close, the gallery began to empty, leaving behind the soft echoes of conversations and the lingering presence of art that had touched hearts. Serena lingered for a while longer, absorbing the stillness and the quiet affirmation that her journey was far from over. Outside, the city's lights shimmered like distant beacons, and the cool night air whispered promises of new beginnings. With Ethan by her side, she stepped out into that nocturnal world, feeling a renewed sense of purpose and an unwavering resolve to continue her path of creative rebirth. In the gentle farewell of the evening, as the gallery doors closed behind her, Serena carried with her the silent knowledge that redemption was not an endpoint but an ongoing process, a continuous act of creation, revision, and hope. The unveiling of her art had been more than a public event. It was a personal triumph, a declaration that even amidst shadows and scars, one can still find the courage to embrace the light. The exhibition was over, yet its echoes lingered. The following morning, Serena found herself seated by the window of her modest home, a cup of tea resting between her fingers as she gazed out at the street below. The world continued as it always had, cars passing, people walking, the city moving with an unspoken rhythm, and yet something within her had shifted. The weight of last night's unveiling still sat in her chest, but it was no longer the oppressive burden it had once been. Instead, it felt like a quiet presence, a reminder of the courage it had taken to stand before the world again. She had not anticipated how deeply the evening would affect her, the conversations, the praise, the lingering glances of those who had connected with her work. It was overwhelming in a way she had not fully processed. But most of all, it was Ethan's presence that had anchored her through it. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She set her tea down, pushing away the lingering fog of introspection as she rose to answer. When she opened the door, Ethan stood there, hands tucked into his coat pockets, his expression calm yet unreadable. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, his voice as familiar now as the silence she had once preferred. She stepped aside, allowing him in. The space was small but warm, a reflection of its owner. Quiet, reserved but holding something beneath the surface that one could not ignore. Ethan glanced around, taking in the carefully arranged bookshelves, the scattered brushes and unfinished sketches. It was a space still caught between hesitation and revival. "I wasn't sure if you'd want company today," he said, leaning against the arm of the couch as she took her seat again by the window. Serena let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "I didn't think I would either," she admitted, "but I'm glad you're here." There was a pause, one that hung not with awkwardness but with something unspoken, something neither had fully articulated yet. Ethan studied her, noting the way her fingers curled lightly around the ceramic mug, the way her gaze remained distant yet alert. "You were incredible last night," he finally said. "Not just your art, but the way you carried yourself. You let people in, even if just a little." Serena exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "It didn't feel that way. It felt vulnerable." "That's because it was," he agreed. "But vulnerability isn't weakness, Serena. Sometimes it's the bravest thing a person can allow themselves to be." She turned to look at him, his words settling into the spaces she rarely let anyone reach. There was no pity in his gaze, no expectation, just understanding. It was something she had begun to rely on more than she cared to admit. "You've always had a way with words," she murmured, her voice softer than before. Ethan tilted his head slightly, a small smile playing at his lips. "And you've always had a way with art. We all express what we carry in different ways." Another silence followed, but this one was filled with meaning rather than absence. Serena traced the rim of her mug with her fingers, contemplating the moment, the man before her, and the road that had led her here. "Last night felt like a chapter closing," she admitted, "but also the beginning of something else. I don't know what yet, but..." She trailed off, unsure of how to put the thought into words. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "Then maybe it doesn't have to be defined right away. Maybe it's just enough that you're moving forward." She considered that, rolling the thought over in her mind. For so long, she had felt trapped between past and present, between the person she had been and the one she was trying to become. But Ethan was right. Perhaps it wasn't about finding immediate answers. Perhaps it was about allowing herself to exist in the in-between without fear. Ethan rose then, stretching slightly before slipping his hands back into his pockets. "Come on," he said. Serena arched a brow. "Where?" Out. His tone was light but insistent. "Anywhere but here. You spent so much time locked away in that studio, then preparing for the exhibition. You need to step outside of your head for a bit." She hesitated, instinctively wanting to retreat, to find solace in solitude the way she always had. But then she saw the way Ethan was watching her. Not pushing, not demanding, just offering. And for once, she didn't want to say no. She set her mug down and stood, reaching for her coat. All right, she said, a hint of something unfamiliar, something dangerously close to hope creeping into her voice. Lead the way. As they stepped out into the cool morning air, Serena couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Last night, she had reclaimed her art. Today, perhaps, she would begin reclaiming herself. The crisp air of a new day unfurled before Serena as she and Ethan wandered along a tree-lined avenue, the city's quiet pulse a gentle counterpoint to the rhythm of their steps. After the exhibition, her life had taken on an almost tangible weight, a mixture of the triumph of unveiling her truth and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Now, with the morning sun casting long, hopeful shadows on the pavement, she felt compelled to explore a path that was entirely her own. They strolled side by side, the conversation between them a blend of reflective pauses and soft revelations. Serena's thoughts drifted to the gallery, to the stirring voices of admiration and the subtle glances that affirmed her long-silenced voice. Yet as she walked, she realized that her work was only one facet of a life slowly rediscovered, a life that now held the promise of forging new experiences, of testing boundaries that she had once thought unyielding. You know, Ethan began quietly as they ambled past a row of budding trees. Sometimes it's not enough to simply leave the old behind. You have to step into the unknown and allow it to transform you. His tone carried the weight of his own journey, a journey marked by moments of doubt, resilience, and an unspoken commitment to embrace vulnerability. Serena regarded him thoughtfully. I've spent so long locked away, sheltering myself from every kind of change. It feels strange, liberating even, to imagine that I might not need to fear what I don't yet understand. The words tumbled out slowly, each syllable a step toward acknowledging that life was not defined solely by past betrayals or solitary nights in the studio. They found themselves in a small park, a haven tucked away from the urban clamor where a gentle fountain murmured at the center and benches invited quiet contemplation. Without a word, Ethan gestured to a secluded spot beneath an ancient oak, its leaves whispering secrets in the light breeze. There, in the soft murmur of nature, Serena allowed herself a moment to breathe, to let go of the remnants of grief that clung so persistently to her heart. Sitting side by side, their silence was not empty. It was filled with the promise of possibilities. Serena closed her eyes for a moment, focusing on the interplay of light and shadow, the distant laughter of children at play, and the rhythmic drip of water from the fountain. Each sensation was a reminder that the world was vast and intricate, filled with beauty and imperfection. A canvas of uncharted horizons waiting to be explored. I've been thinking a lot about what it means to truly move on, she confessed softly, her gaze fixed on the shimmering surface of the fountain. Not just to forget or pretend, but to embrace every part of the journey, both the pain and the moments of unexpected joy. Her voice trembled slightly as she admitted, "The lingering uncertainties, sometimes I worry that stepping out into the unknown might unearth new fears." Ethan's eyes met hers with a steady reassurance. "The unknown can be frightening, but it also holds the key to growth," he said gently. "Every new experience, every unfamiliar place can be a chance to learn more about who you are and who you might yet become." His words were soft, yet carried a resonant conviction, as though he had traveled his own labyrinth of fears and emerged stronger on the other side. For a time they sat in quiet reflection, letting the afternoon unfold around them like a slow, deliberate dance. The park, with its verdant lawns and dappled sunlight, became a space of tentative renewal, a reminder that life's transitions, however unpredictable, could also lead to unforeseen beauty. In that shared silence, Serena began to understand that the journey forward was less about erasing what had been and more about integrating every fragment of her past into a tapestry of evolving self-discovery. Rising from the bench, she looked at Ethan with a newfound determination. "Maybe it's time I stopped measuring my worth by the shadows that once held me back," she murmured. "Perhaps I should let the uncharted paths ahead guide me rather than fear them." Her words, spoken with a mix of hesitance and resolve, hinted at a readiness to face the unpredictable future. Ethan smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in quiet warmth. "That's exactly it," he replied. "Each step you take, even if it feels uncertain, is a step toward a version of yourself that's waiting to be discovered." His tone was encouraging without being insistent, a delicate balance of support and respect for her autonomy. Their conversation shifted seamlessly from introspection to lighter musings as they wandered deeper into the park. They spoke of art and literature, of music that stirred dormant memories, and of dreams that once felt too distant to pursue. In these exchanges, Serena found that the world outside was not a repository of old sorrows, but a vibrant mosaic of experiences waiting to be lived. The laughter of strangers, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and the gentle cadence of footsteps all coalesced into a symphony of possibility, a reminder that every moment held the potential for rebirth. As the day gave way to early evening, the sky transformed into a canvas of soft pastels, a subtle promise that even the fleeting hours held beauty. Serena paused at the edge of a small bridge overlooking a winding creek, its waters reflecting the myriad colors of twilight. She took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs, and for the first time in a long while, she felt unburdened by the weight of the past. "I think I'm ready to take a leap," she said, her voice steady yet laced with the thrill of uncertainty. "Not because I'm unafraid, but because I'm ready to find out what lies beyond the familiar walls I've built around myself." Her declaration was a quiet act of courage, a promise to herself that the future could be shaped by bold, uncharted choices, rather than by the ghosts of yesterday. Ethan reached out and gently squeezed her hand in silent affirmation. "And I'll be with you," he murmured, his tone conveying both commitment and the understanding that their paths, though winding and unpredictable, were best navigated together. In that moment, under the gentle embrace of a fading day in a sky alive with promise, Serena realized that her journey was only just beginning. The uncharted horizons before her were not obstacles to be feared, but invitations to grow, to explore, and ultimately to live. With Ethan by her side and her own resilient spirit guiding her, she stepped forward into the unknown, a step that resonated with the quiet certainty that every new beginning was itself a work of art waiting to be painted. The day arrived with a rare clarity, as if the world itself had decided to offer a gentle reprieve from its usual haste. Serena awoke to a quiet dawn that brought with it the promise of connection, a promise that had slowly grown in the spaces between her tentative steps towards self-discovery. Today was different. It felt as though every moment was a deliberate invitation to build something lasting from the fragile threads of her emerging hope. After a morning of solitary reflection, Serena prepared to meet Ethan at a small cafe tucked away from the relentless clamor of the city. It was a favorite spot of theirs, a haven where the soft hum of conversation and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee created an atmosphere of intimacy. The cafe's worn wooden tables and gentle light were reminiscent of a time when trust was not easily granted, and yet here, in this quiet refuge, when she arrived, Ethan was already seated at a table near a window. His face, illuminated by the soft morning sun, carried a calm assurance that had become a steadying force in her life. Their eyes met, and in that silent acknowledgement lay a shared understanding of past sorrows, of uncertain futures, and of the willingness to build bridges over troubled waters. "Good morning, Serena," Ethan greeted softly, a hint of warmth in his voice that immediately eased the lingering tension in her chest. There was no need for grand gestures or elaborate introductions here. Their connection had grown from the quiet art of simply being present for one another. As they sipped their coffee, the conversation flowed with a natural rhythm. They spoke of everyday wonders, the changing colors of the leaves outside, the soft murmur of distant traffic, and the subtle ways in which each moment carried the potential for renewal. But beneath these gentle exchanges lay a deeper current. Serena found herself sharing thoughts that had long been locked away, reflections on the delicate process of healing, the weight of unspoken promises, and the strength it took to trust again after years of solitude. Ethan listened with unguarded compassion, his eyes never wavering from hers as he absorbed every word. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the hardest part isn't letting go of the past, but learning to allow the present to offer its own gifts. Trust isn't built in a single moment. It's woven slowly, thread by careful thread." His words resonated with Serena. In the past, she had believed that trust was a fragile structure, easily shattered by betrayal. Yet here, in the gentle cadence of his voice, she recognized that vulnerability could be transformed into a source of strength. It was as if every shared moment, every sincere glance and unhurried word was a brick in the foundation of a bridge that connected her once isolated heart to a future filled with promise. After their conversation at the cafe, Ethan invited her to take a walk along a winding path by a nearby river. The water flowed steadily, its gentle current mirroring the quiet persistence of change. Side by side, they strolled along the banks, the soft murmur of the river providing a rhythmic accompaniment to their measured steps. Serena felt the familiar pull of memories, mingled with the thrill of possibility. The river, ever changing yet constant in its flow, served as a subtle reminder that life, too, moved forward regardless of the weight of its past. During a brief pause on an old stone bridge, they found themselves looking out over the water, each lost in their thoughts. The bridge itself, weathered and time-worn, seemed to embody the idea of connection. Its arches had withstood countless storms and turbulent seasons, a testament to the resilience that lay hidden beneath apparent frailty. Sometimes, Serena murmured, almost to herself, I feel like that bridge, a structure built from scars, but still strong enough to support hope. Her voice trembled with the weight of truth as she admitted the vulnerability she had long guarded. Ethan turned to her, his gaze steady and encouraging. Your scars are not marks of weakness, he replied gently. They are proof that you have endured, that you have faced the darkness and emerged with a spark still intact. Trust, like that bridge, requires us to lean into the unknown, to risk the possibility of pain in exchange for the promise of connection. In that moment, the simple act of leaning against the railing of the bridge became symbolic. Serena allowed herself to feel the solidity of the structure beneath her hand, as though the cold stone could absorb her lingering doubts. With Ethan's quiet support, she began to see that the process of trust was not about erasing the past, but about integrating it. Learning to recognize that each fracture in her heart had also built a unique strength, a roadmap leading to an uncharted future. They continued their walk in silence for a time, each step echoing with the unspoken understanding that they were both navigating a delicate balance between holding on and letting go. The city beyond the river pulsed with life, its energy a stark contrast to the contemplative quiet of their shared journey. Yet even in the midst of that vibrant backdrop, Serena and Ethan found solace in the intimacy of their connection, a bond that was slowly mending the remnants of old wounds. As dusk began to color the sky in soft shades of lavender and rose, they returned to the familiar embrace of the cafe, their conversation now laced with the gentle promise of new beginnings. Over cups of tea and a quiet dinner, they revisited the day's reflections, each word a reaffirmation of the bridges they were building between their past and their future. Serena, whose heart had once been a fortress of solitude, now allowed herself to lean into the vulnerability of genuine connection. Ethan, whose own journey had taught him the value of patience and empathy, offered his unwavering presence as a steady light in the encroaching twilight. Before parting ways that evening, as they stepped out into the cool night air under a canopy of starlight, Serena paused to look back at the path they had walked together. In that lingering moment, she realized that trust was not a destination but a continuous journey, a series of small, deliberate choices to keep moving forward, even when the way was uncertain. It was the willingness to take each step with the knowledge that every moment of vulnerability was also an act of courage. Thank you, Ethan, she said softly, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and the quiet resolve of someone learning to embrace life again. For walking this path with me, for showing me that even the most fragile bridges can carry us to new horizons. Ethan's smile was gentle, his reply measured with sincerity. I'm honored to be here, Serena. We're building something beautiful, one step at a time. And so beneath the shimmering light of a night that held both remembrance and hope, they parted with the promise that tomorrow would bring yet another opportunity to bridge the gap between what had been and what could be. The path ahead was uncharted, its twists and turns unknown, but in that moment, Serena felt a quiet certainty that she was no longer alone on the journey. A realization that, in the intricate tapestry of life, every bridge built in trust could lead to a future brighter than the shadows of yesterday. The morning light spilled through Serena's studio windows, illuminating the forgotten canvases that had stood untouched for years. They lined the walls like silent witnesses to her past, remnants of a time when her passion had been unshaken, when the strokes of her brush had carried the weight of raw emotion rather than hesitation. Ethan's words from the previous day lingered in her mind. Trust isn't built in a single moment. It's woven slowly, thread by careful thread. It was true, not just for her relationship with him, but for her relationship with herself, with her art. For too long, she had allowed fear to dictate her movements, letting the ghosts of betrayal and loss whisper that creation was futile if it could be tainted by pain. But perhaps, she thought, it was time to rewrite that belief. She stood before an unfinished piece, one she had abandoned long ago when doubt had tightened its grip. The paint had dried mid-expression, leaving an image that felt incomplete, suspended between despair and possibility. The brush in her hand felt foreign at first, like holding an old letter from someone she had once known intimately, but had since forgotten. Taking a slow breath, she dipped the brush into a deep, rich blue. The bristles met the canvas, and for the first time in years, the stroke felt natural rather than forced. The door creaked open, breaking the silence. She didn't have to turn around to know it was Ethan. His presence was something she had grown accustomed to, a steady, unspoken understanding that never demanded, never intruded. He stepped inside, but said nothing, simply observing. "Do you ever wonder," Serena murmured, eyes fixed on the canvas, "if certain things in life are meant to remain unfinished?" Ethan leaned against the door frame. "I think the choice is always ours. Some things we leave behind because we must, but others are simply waiting for us to find the courage to return." She considered his words, letting them settle. The past had stolen many things from her: certainty, trust, belief in herself, but it had not taken away her ability to begin again. That, she realized, had always been within her grasp. She continued painting as Ethan quietly observed. The brush moved with newfound conviction, each stroke layered with a quiet defiance against the years she had spent in retreat. After a while, Ethan moved to her bookshelf, scanning the spines of books coated in a thin film of dust. He pulled out a well-worn volume and flipped through its pages, pausing at a passage. "You once told me," he said without looking up, "that art isn't just about creating something beautiful, it's about speaking truths that words alone can't carry." Serena stilled, her brush hovering just above the canvas. She had forgotten she had said that, or perhaps she had forced herself to forget. Ethan turned the book toward her. It was a collection of letters from an artist she had once admired, filled with reflections on creation, loss, and the intimate connection between emotion and expression. She took the book from him and traced a finger over the faded ink. The words, once so familiar, now felt like echoes from a life she had buried. Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. "You're speaking again, Serena, even if it's just to yourself, even if it's hesitant. This," he gestured to the painting, "this is your voice." For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to argue. As the hours passed, the studio became a space of quiet companionship. Ethan didn't push her to talk, and Serena didn't feel the need to fill the silence. Instead, they existed in the moment, side by side. Her painting, him reading, the unspoken understanding between them growing with every passing second. When Serena finally set her brush down, exhaustion settled into her bones, but it was a different kind of exhaustion. Not the weary heaviness of retreat, but the satisfying ache of effort, of motion. Ethan closed his book and stretched. "Hungry?" She considered saying no. It was her instinct, after all, to retreat before anything felt too real, too steady. But something about this moment, about the way he had simply been here, made her pause. "Yes," she admitted. "I think I am." He smiled, a quiet victory neither of them needed to acknowledge out loud. As they left the studio together, the unfinished canvases remained, but something had shifted. They were no longer relics of failure. They were waiting, just like she had been. Serena's first exhibition in years was not something she had ever expected. The mere thought of showing her work again, displaying her most vulnerable expressions for the world to judge, had seemed impossible just months ago, yet here she was, standing on the edge of something monumental, something terrifying, yet undeniably liberating. The gallery was bustling, filled with whispers and soft footsteps that seemed to echo too loudly against the polished floors. Serena stood in the corner of the room, watching the attendees admire her work from a distance, each glance at her pieces like a mirror reflecting her own hesitations. She couldn't help but feel the weight of their eyes on her, like they could somehow see into the parts of her she had kept buried for so long. Ethan stood beside her, ever watchful, ever steady. He had insisted that she attend the event, and though every part of her resisted the idea, she now understood his reasoning. This wasn't just an exhibition. This was her reclamation. "I never thought I'd be here," she murmured, her gaze fixed on one of her more intimate pieces, an abstract representation of a shattered heart, the brushstrokes frenzied and chaotic. The image felt raw, almost painful to look at. Yet it was undeniably hers. Ethan's presence was a constant comfort, a reminder that she had come far enough to let herself be seen again. His eyes were focused not on the crowd or the art, but on her. "You've earned this," he said quietly, as if the words alone could shield her from the vulnerability that tugged at her insides. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "I don't know if I've earned it, Ethan. What if they don't see me? What if they only see the woman who was broken? He turned to her, his expression soft yet resolute. They'll see you for what you are now, the woman who rebuilt herself from those pieces, who learned to trust again. They'll see the strength in what you've made. Her breath caught in her throat. It was the first time she had ever allowed herself to hear those words and accept their truth. The fear still clung to her, but beneath it she could feel something else. An undercurrent of something new, something brave. The evening passed in a blur of conversation, champagne glasses and admiration from the guests, but through it all, Serena remained tethered to the quiet, grounding presence of Ethan. Every time her gaze flickered to one of her paintings, it was as if she could feel the weight of her own history in the strokes, the emotions that had once been buried beneath layers of pain. Yet tonight, there was no shame in her work. For the first time in years, she could look at her art and feel pride. But then it happened. A familiar voice cut through the hum of conversation. Serena's heart stuttered in her chest as she turned to face the last person she had ever expected to see at her exhibition. Carla. Carla had once been her closest friend, someone she had trusted with her heart and her dreams. They had shared their hopes, their fears, their ambitions, but betrayal had ripped them apart, leaving nothing but bitter fragments of what had once been. Serena felt a pang in her chest. The woman standing before her was no longer the friend she had known. Carla was a stranger now, a reminder of the trust she had once placed in the wrong hands. Carla smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Serena, she said, her voice laced with false sweetness, I have to admit, I didn't expect you to make a comeback. But then again, your talent was always undeniable, wasn't it? Serena's pulse quickened, the old wounds reopening with an intensity she hadn't prepared for. What do you want, Carla? Her voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of sharpness she couldn't hide. Carla's smile faltered for just a moment before she masked it with a casual air. I just wanted to see how you were doing. You've been so distant lately. She glanced around the room, her eyes lingering on the guests, then returned to Serena. I'm surprised you even agreed to put your work out there after everything. Serena's breath caught. Everything. That phrase, the one that had haunted her for so long, the one that felt like a reproach. It wasn't just about the art, it was about the betrayal, the lies, the shattered trust. It was about the part of herself that had once believed in people and had been proven wrong. I don't need your approval, Carla, Serena said, her voice cutting through the tension that hung between them like a blade. I've found my way back without it. Carla's eyes narrowed and Serena could feel the old animosity simmering just beneath the surface. You always were too proud for your own good, Carla remarked, her tone turning colder. But you should know that people will always remember what happened. You can't erase the past, no matter how many pretty pictures you hang on a wall. Serena's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she held her ground. The past is what it is, but I'm not here to be defined by it anymore. I'm here to show who I am now. There was a long pause, a silence thick with unspoken words. Then, before Carla could respond, Ethan stepped forward, his presence steady and unwavering. Serena's past doesn't define her, and neither does yours. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that sent a ripple of discomfort through the air. Carla's eyes flicked to Ethan, and for the first time she seemed at a loss for words. The silence stretched on, uncomfortable and thick, until finally, Carla turned on her heel and walked away. Serena exhaled, her body tense from the encounter. She felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion, the old wound still raw but no longer bleeding. Ethan's hand found hers, and she squeezed it tightly, finding comfort in his unwavering presence. You're stronger than you think, he said softly, his words a reminder that she was no longer the woman who had allowed herself to be broken. Serena looked up at him, a quiet gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, for being here, for believing in me. Ethan smiled, his expression warm and full of quiet pride. Always. And for the first time in a long time, Serena felt like she could truly breathe again. The past no longer had a hold over her. It had shaped her, yes, but it had not defined her. She had chosen to step forward into the light, and no one could take that away from her. The following weeks brought a gentle cadence to Serena's life. After the emotional turbulence of the exhibition and the encounter with Carla, she returned to her studio with a renewed sense of purpose. The once dormant space, filled with scattered canvases and the lingering scent of turpentine, had evolved into a haven where memories and aspirations coexisted. Each brushstroke now carried the weight of experience rather than the bitterness of regret, and every unfinished canvas offered a promise of transformation. In the early hours of one particular morning, Serena found herself seated before a vast, blank canvas, a new challenge that beckoned her to weave together the disparate threads of her recent journey. The studio's light was soft and unwavering, filtering through gauzy curtains and creating delicate patterns on the hardwood floor. She remembered a time when art had been an escape, a way to flee the painful echoes of betrayal, but now it had become a medium to reconcile her past with a future yet to be written. Ethan visited that day, arriving with a quiet determination that had grown even stronger in recent times. He carried with him not only his familiar notebooks and thoughtful observations, but also a small bundle of wildflowers he had picked along a walk. The blooms, vibrant against the muted backdrop of the studio, symbolized the unexpected beauty that emerged when life's harsh realities softened. Without uttering a word, he placed the bouquet on the work table, a silent encouragement that reminded Serena she was not alone on this path. Sitting side by side, they began to speak in a language that transcended words. Serena's hand moved hesitantly at first, then with a growing confidence as she layered color upon color. The canvas absorbed her emotions, deep blues that spoke of lingering sorrow, vivid oranges and reds that symbolized passion and the fiery determination to overcome, and gentle greens that hinted at renewal. With every stroke, she was constructing a narrative, a portrait of a soul that had weathered storms and found its footing once more. As the hours passed, Ethan's quiet presence became a steady rhythm in the background, an unspoken promise of support. Between moments of concentrated silence, he would offer soft observations about the interplay of hues or remark on the delicate balance between shadow and light. His words, measured and sincere, acted as a counterpoint to her inner monologue, reinforcing the belief that vulnerability was not a liability, but a source of strength. Together, they discussed the nature of art and life, the unpredictable currents that, if embraced, could lead to a convergence of paths once thought to diverge irreparably. Later that afternoon, a knock at the studio door introduced an unexpected visitor. It was Nadia, a fellow artist and an old friend whose work had always shared an unspoken kinship with Serena's. Nadia's arrival carried with it a subtle energy, a melding of excitement and genuine curiosity about the evolution of Serena's art. With warm greetings and a light embrace, Nadia entered, her eyes immediately drawn to the new canvas. "Your work has changed," Nadia observed, her tone filled with both admiration and a hint of astonishment. "There is an openness in these colors, a willingness to let every part of you speak." Serena's gaze shifted from her canvas to Nadia's earnest eyes. "I have been learning to integrate every fragment of my past, the pain, the hope, even the fear. I once believed that certain chapters were best left closed, but now I see that every experience has contributed to who I am today," she explained, her voice calm and resolute. Nadia settled into a worn armchair near the window, and the three of them conversed about the interplay between memory and creation. Nadia recalled the days when art was a quiet rebellion, a secret conversation between a lonely heart and the vast unknown. Serena listened as Nadia recounted her own struggles with vulnerability, and Ethan offered reflections that bridged their shared experiences. The conversation flowed effortlessly, creating a tapestry of ideas that mirrored the intricate layers on Serena's canvas. Outside, the city moved with a purposeful energy, a reminder that time was an ever-advancing tide, carrying both losses and new beginnings. The conversation turned toward the future and the potential of collaborative projects. Nadia suggested a joint exhibition, a showcase where artists who had transformed their personal adversities into visual narratives could present their work together. The idea resonated deeply with Serena. The prospect of sharing her journey with others who had also embraced the beauty of imperfection filled her with cautious optimism. Ethan's eyes brightened at the suggestion. "There is power in community," he remarked quietly. "When we allow our individual paths to converge, we create a network of resilience that can uplift not only us, but everyone who encounters our work." Encouraged by their shared vision, the trio began planning an informal gathering, a preview of what might become a larger collaborative project. The conversation soon evolved into a brainstorming session, ideas flowing freely as they considered themes, venues, and the potential stories that could be told through a collective exhibition. Serena felt her heart stir with a mix of excitement and trepidation. For so long, she had guarded her creative process as though it were a sacred secret, but now the prospect of merging her narrative with those of others offered a transformative opportunity. It was as if her journey of healing was part of a larger mosaic, one that could inspire not only herself, but a community of artists and viewers alike. As dusk settled outside, casting a warm amber glow through the studio windows, Serena returned to her canvas. Her earlier work had evolved into a complex interplay of textures and colors that seemed to capture not only her personal rebirth, but the possibility of collective transformation. With each deliberate stroke, she felt more certain that every unfinished canvas, every past wound, and every moment of quiet despair had led her to this pivotal convergence, a moment when her solitary journey intersected with a broader vision of artistic community and shared resilience. Ethan, Nadia, and Serena spent the remainder of the evening immersed in creative discussion and gentle laughter. The studio, once a refuge of solitary introspection, now pulsed with the vibrant energy of possibility. In that space, the boundaries between past and present blurred, and the promise of a future built on mutual support shone with quiet brilliance. When the time finally came to part ways, the three artists embraced the night with hearts that had been touched by the day's collaborative spirit. Serena lingered at the window for a few moments, gazing out at the city below. The quiet hum of distant traffic and the soft glow of streetlights reminded her that life was a continuous series of moments, a mosaic of endings and beginnings intertwined. In that reflective silence, she realized that her journey was no longer a solitary pursuit. The convergence of paths, her own, Ethan's, and Nadia's, had forged a new direction, one where the weight of past betrayals was transformed into the strength of creative unity. Each step forward was a testament to the power of connection, and every brushstroke on her canvas was a silent ode to the resilience that had brought her to this point. Serena turned away from the window with a gentle smile, the unspoken promise of tomorrow shining in her eyes. As she gathered her brushes and prepared to leave the studio, she carried with her the certainty that her life, much like her art, was a work in progress, ever evolving, ever intertwined with the voices and visions of those who walked beside her. The days following the collaborative planning session blended into a tapestry of creative energy and personal reflection. Serena found herself stepping into routines that were as much about self-expression as they were about rediscovering the pulse of a community that resonated with her own struggles and triumphs. The studio had transformed once more, from a secluded haven into a vibrant workshop where ideas were exchanged, revised, and celebrated. Early one morning, as a soft mist rolled over the city, Serena arrived at the gallery space where preparations for the joint exhibition were underway. The once quiet hall buzzed with the murmurs of fellow artists, curators, and friends, each contributing to the metamorphosis of the space. Tables were arranged with sketches and mock-ups, while large canvases leaned against walls, each carrying fragments of stories yet to be shared. For Serena, this was no longer just an exhibition, it was a living dialogue, an ongoing performance in which every stroke of a brush and every whispered idea was a step toward forging something new. Ethan greeted her at the entrance with a smile that radiated both reassurance and excitement. "Today is the day our dreams start to take form," he said, his voice imbued with a quiet conviction that had become her steady anchor. As they walked through the bustling corridors of the gallery, Serena's eyes lingered on details that once would have evoked anxiety. The sharp clatter of footsteps, the overlapping conversations, and the expectancy in every smile. Now, each element felt like an invitation, a dance between vulnerability and possibility. At one of the stations, Nadia was busy arranging a series of mixed media pieces that combined photography with abstract paintings. Her work, like a bridge between past and present, set the tone for the exhibition's theme, transformation through collective memory. Serena joined her, and together they discussed how every piece could be a window into the soul, a way to honor the scars while celebrating the beauty born from them. In that exchange, Serena felt an undeniable surge of kinship, an understanding that art was the ultimate act of daring, a way to turn the fragments of pain into a mosaic of hope. Later in the day, as the exhibition neared its preview, Serena was invited to speak to a small gathering of local art enthusiasts. Standing before a softly lit podium, she took a deep breath and allowed the steady hum of the room to guide her words. "Our journeys, though marked by individual struggles, are interwoven," she began, her voice resonant with both tenderness and strength. Every brushstroke in our work is a testament to the power of renewal, a reminder that even in the face of betrayal and loss, we can rise, we can create, and we can forge connections that defy time. Her words, simple yet profound, were met with nods of understanding and the quiet applause of those who had long yearned to believe in second chances. After the talk, amidst the mingling and gentle laughter, Serena found a quiet moment on a small balcony overlooking the city. The skyline was a silhouette against the soft glow of dusk, a reminder that every ending was, in its own way, a precursor to a new beginning. Ethan joined her quietly, and together they watched as the city lights flickered to life. "This is your dance, Serena," he said softly. "Each step you take, each piece of art, every shared story is part of a rhythm that carries you forward." In his eyes, she saw not pity or patronization, but a genuine celebration of her courage to face the unknown. As the night deepened, the gallery transformed into a space of shared celebration. Groups of people clustered around displays, discussing techniques and emotions, while others simply stood in silence, absorbing the raw vulnerability displayed before them. Serena wandered among the exhibits, each interaction a reaffirmation that her past, while painful, had given birth to a resilience that now inspired others. Every conversation, every thoughtful remark was a step in the intricate dance of new beginnings, a dance where each movement was a deliberate choice to embrace life in all its messy, beautiful complexity. Before the final hour, as the last guests began to leave and the gallery was bathed in a gentle, reflective calm, Serena retreated to a quiet corner with Ethan. Their hands brushed softly, a silent vow that the journey was far from over. "I used to think that my art was a solitary endeavor, that the canvas was the only place where I could be truly honest," Serena murmured, her gaze drifting toward a piece that had elicited memories of both sorrow and redemption. "But now I see that when our paths converge, when we dare to share our stories, we create something far greater than what any one of us could achieve alone." Ethan's smile was a promise of shared tomorrows. "Our paths have a way of intertwining," he replied, "and in that interlacing we find strength and beauty that we never knew existed." In the quiet aftermath of the exhibition, as the gallery lights dimmed and the echoes of the evening faded into the soft hum of the night, Serena felt a profound shift within her, a sense that the dance of new beginnings was an endless waltz, filled with moments of delicate vulnerability and unstoppable determination. Each step, no matter how tentative, was a testament to her evolution, a declaration that even amidst the echoes of unfinished canvases, there lay an unwavering promise of transformation. With a heart both lightened and emboldened, Serena stepped out into the cool night, ready to embrace the next movement of her life's dance, knowing that every new horizon, every shared smile and quiet word of encouragement was a step toward a future replete with hope, connection, and endless possibility. The night of the exhibition arrived in a crescendo of anticipation. The gallery, once a space of silent contemplation, now pulsed with energy. Voices overlapping, glasses clinking, the rustle of elegant attire as guests moved between displays. Lights hung in a warm golden glow, casting soft halos over the canvases that told stories of pain, healing, and rebirth. Serena stood at the edge of it all, watching from a quiet corner. Her name whispered through the crowd, admiration woven into each syllable, but it was not the praise that stirred something deep inside her. It was the realization that, for the first time in years, she was not merely an observer of life. She was living it. Her work hung prominently in the main hall, a collection of paintings that, when viewed together, formed a narrative of her journey. The first, dark and chaotic, reflected the pain of betrayal, the shattering of trust. The middle pieces shifted into softer tones, hesitant strokes of light breaking through the gloom, and the final painting, its colors vibrant, the brushwork bold, stood as a declaration of renewal. Ethan, standing among a small group of admirers, turned as if sensing her gaze. He found her in an instant, his eyes searching for something unspoken. She exhaled, steadying herself. Tonight was not just about art. It was about finally stepping beyond the walls she had built so carefully. A hush settled over the room as the curator took the stage, her poised presence commanding attention. "Tonight, we celebrate more than an artist's return," she said. "We celebrate the power of transformation, of courage, of the stories that live within every brushstroke." A ripple of applause followed, but Serena barely heard it. Her pulse thrummed in her ears as the curator gestured toward her. "Serena, would you like to say a few words?" A moment of silence stretched too long. She had prepared something forward, her fingers measured distance at her speech about art. The audience turned toward her, expectant. But standing here in this room where every piece held fragments of her soul, where Ethan stood watching her with quiet devotion, that speech felt hollow. She let it go. When I first picked up a brush again, she began, her voice steady but raw, I was convinced that this was simply about reclaiming a lost part of myself. But I was wrong. This isn't just about art. It's about the people who remind us that we are more than the sum of our pain, that we are worthy of second chances. A murmur moved through the crowd, but Serena's gaze never wavered from Ethan. She took a step closer, the words forming before she could second-guess them. There is someone in this room who saw me long before I could see myself again, who was patient when I withdrew, who listened when I had no words, who reminded me again and again that life is still beautiful even when it is unbearably hard. Ethan's breath hitched, his expression shifting from curiosity to something deeper, something incredulous. I was afraid to believe it, she continued, her voice soft but sure. Afraid that warmth was just an illusion, that love was something fleeting, but I see now that it's real and that it's worth everything. A hush fell, deeper than before. Every pair of eyes flickered between them, but Serena saw only him. Oh, Ethan, she said, her voice breaking slightly, I love you. The words hung suspended as if the room itself had paused to hold them in reverence. For a heartbeat, Ethan did not move. Then in a moment that felt both endless and instantaneous, he closed the space between them. His hands, always gentle, cupped her face as if anchoring himself in this reality. Serena, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, I have loved you for so long, even when you couldn't see it, even when you weren't ready. But hearing you say it, he exhaled, shaking his head in quiet wonder. It's more than I ever hoped for. Applause erupted, but neither of them noticed. They stood wrapped in the quiet hume of something deeper, something unbreakable. Later that night, as the gallery emptied and the city lights shimmered beyond the glass windows, Serena and Ethan lingered in the quiet. I didn't think I would ever be able to say it out loud, she admitted, her fingers lacing with his. You didn't have to, Ethan replied, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I already knew, but hearing it, he smiled, something radiant, something free. It's everything. And in that moment, Serena knew that love, like art, was not about perfection. It was about honesty, about the courage to begin again, to stand before the world, flawed, vulnerable, real, and say, here I am, unfinished but not afraid. And that, my friends, is how even the coldest heart can find warmth again. Love, like art, is about taking risks, bold strokes on a blank canvas, hoping it all comes together in the end. Serena thought she had lost everything, but in reality, she was just waiting for the right person to remind her that she was never truly broken, just unfinished. So, what do you think? Would you have had the patience Ethan had, or do you think some hearts are too frozen to thaw? Let me know in the comments, and as always, if you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.